that those guys will actually not forgive nor forget. You have to give them something.
The big news overnight about the Jeffrey Epstein files and the conspiracy theories officially being rejected. Overnight, the FBI and Justice Department releasing 11 hours of footage they say helps confirm notorious financier Jeffrey Epstein died by suicide in his Manhattan jail cell in 2019, awaiting his sex trafficking trial. According to a memo detailing the findings, investigators found the video showed no one entering the area in the overnight hours before Epstein.
I mean, I told you so's are in order for those who actually believed, even for a brief moment, that the Trump administration would ever actually reveal any of these details, if they would actually shed new light on this stuff. Of course they would not.
Hello, welcome.
And CoffeeZilla, once again, on the pathway to radicalizing from the Trump administration, has a video on this. We'll obviously take a look at that as well. But interesting. Maybe after Trump dies? No, because only 30, 40, 50 years in the future, once every single person that's on the client list is long gone, would there potentially ever be declassification? Why would the federal government release information on the federal government's own intelligence community's blackmail operation and influence operation? Why would they do that? Y'all are crazy. Trump's labor secretary, Alexander Acosta, was straight up the South Florida prosecutor that gave Jeffrey Epstein his first sweetheart plea bargain deal. It's so funny to me that these guys go, oh my God, I can't believe that the Trump administration that is directly involved with Jeffrey Epstein are not revealing any new information and just basically saying the exact same things that they personally said, the previous administration said that they actively petitioned against. How shocking. Shocking, guys. I can't believe the Trump administration is not only protecting themselves, but also all of the same wealthy people that the Democrats also protected, that the Republicans have also consistently protected. That's, wow, shocking stuff, shocking revelations.
Found unresponsive. But perhaps the biggest bombshell, investigators say they found no incriminating client list of Epstein's, no credible evidence that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals, and no evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. For years, Epstein has been at the center of conspiracies surrounding both his death and...
Oh, never mind then. Guys, I mean, it's concluded. I guess it's nothing to see here, folks. Folks, nothing to see here. Pack it up. I didn't realize it was like that. Thank you. Thank you for informing me. I guess there's no reason to investigate this any further. Please stop. Please avert your invested and interested eyes away from this incident. The government has basically told you what's what. Now shut the up. Even Fox News was like, Cap.
Sure. Caroline. Okay, so the FBI looks at the circumstances surrounding the death of Jeffrey Epstein. According to the report, this systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. So what happened to the Epstein client list that the Attorney General said she had on her desk?
Well, I think if you go back and look at what the Attorney General said in that interview, which was on your network on Fox News.
Got the quote.
Go ahead.
John Roberts said, DOJ may be releasing...
Dude, these guys, when they want to be, can become such amazing journalists, literally on the spot. It should remind you how indecent they are in every other instance, okay? When every single one of these charlatans want to be a real journalist, like that follow-up is the bare minimum that every journalist is capable of doing, knowing full well what the immediate retraction is going to look like, what the immediate response is going to look like. And he came in hot. He didn't have to go back. He didn't have to wait another day. Right on the spot. This is real journalism. And it's shocking that it's coming from a motherfucker like Peter Ducey of Fox News. Look at that. Shocking. He did not miss a beat, dude. Look.
List. So what happened to the Epstein client list that the Attorney General said she had on her desk?
Well, I think if you go back and look at what the Attorney General said in that interview, which was on your network on Fox News.
Got the quote.
Go ahead.
John Roberts said, DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen? And she said, it's sitting on my desk right now to review.
Yes, she was saying the entirety of all of the paperwork, all of the paper in relation to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. That's what the Attorney General was referring to, and I'll let her speak for that. But again, when it comes to...
Wait a minute. Wait a dang minute. What? What happened? What is this, Lamau? I can't believe Epstein killed himself right before he was about to be acquitted due to a complete lack of evidence. Yeah, that's so crazy when you think about it, actually. Yeah. It seems like there was no evidence whatsoever, and he just felt kind of bad. There was a big stack of papers, and the papers were all empty, okay? It's interesting because they're not even doing the Democrats or the file route on this one. They're not even doing the Democrat liberal elite were the files, and the Republicans are like, they didn't even sanitize the list to like remove the Republican names from it or whatever. They just straight up are like, nope, no list exists. JD Vance in 2021, what possible interest would the U.S. government have in keeping Epstein's clients secret? ... Oh, Jack Posobiec, are you paying attention yet? The DOJ and Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers have made a deal that our little black book of contacts will never be made public. If you're a journalist and you're not asking questions about this case, you should be ashamed of yourself. What purpose do you even serve? I'm sure there's a middle-class teenager somewhere who could use some harassing right now, but maybe try to do your job once in a while. Yeah, a postmortem acquittal to Jeffrey Epstein. We were so wrong. See? Further evidence that if Jeffrey Epstein actually didn't die, didn't get killed, he could have just done the podcaster route and became a prominent fixture of Republican politics. And therefore, he could have had his reputation sanitized. And all of these guys would be talking about how Sigma Grindset he is and how dope he actually is. He was just actually just an ephebophile and not a pile. Like all these people would probably be doing that. That was, of course, J.D. Vance in 2021 when he was not the vice president. Remember that. Now that he is the vice president, I'm sure he has a very different approach to it.
The FBI and the Department of Justice, they are more than committed to ensuring that bad people are put behind bars. They have an operation going on right now called Summer Heat, which has our murder rate trending in the lowest direction in United States history. Their emphasis on violent crime and locking up violent criminals has led to the arrest of 14,000 violent criminals. That's a 62% increase from the same time period last year. So this Attorney General and the FBI Director are committed to putting bad people behind bars where they belong. They promised an exhaustive review. That's what they did. For any further details, I would refer you to the Department of Justice.
Well, I'm now firmly on Team Epstein didn't kill after the mistakes they were made in this release. Let's break it down. This 10-hour video does not show Epstein's cell. It's across the entire hall from Epstein's section. You can see that in the attached image. I mean, some of this stuff, some of this like armchair analysis is going to be wrong initially, by the way. I'm just letting you know. I don't know. I haven't looked into that person's statements, but we can potentially match it up with what we do know. But here, let's keep going.
And a rumored client list allegedly used to blackmail powerful men. Attorney General Pam Bondi, back in February, was asked if the Justice Department intended to release a list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Bondi saying this.
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that.
So have you seen anything there? You said, oh my gosh.
Not yet.
And just last month, while feuding with President Trump, Elon Musk posting, time to drop the really big bomb. @real Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they have not been made public. Have a nice day, Donald J. Trump. But Musk later deleted that.
Guys, don't look at that. Musk deleted it. Elon Musk deleted that, okay? So it's not, you shouldn't use that. I mean, come on now. I mean, who amongst us hasn't accused their partner in crime of being a participator in an international trafficking scheme?
And others saying he went too far in attacking Trump. The president saying he cut ties with Epstein nearly 2 decades ago, saying even Epstein's lawyer cleared him. This is the first time the Trump administration has officially contradicted conspiracy theories about Epstein, theories previously pushed by members of the administration.
To get to the bottom of what happened.
Caroline, the DOJ and FBI have now concluded there was no Jeffrey Epstein client list. What do you tell MAGA supporters who say they want anyone involved in Jeffrey Epstein's alleged crime?
It's so crazy because, like, this is the one thing that will brick some of the Trump camp. Like, I said this before, I said this last time they like did this like brief release, right? Where it was nothing at all. Remember when all of the MAGA influencers they brought into the White House were like all celebrating, like libs of TikTok and shit. We're all celebrating about like, oh, Jeffrey Epstein stuff. It's coming out. This administration is so based. They're so based. You don't understand. Like, this is the one thing that those guys will actually not forgive nor forget. You can't create a base of support from conspiracy theorists, as the Trump admin did, and then have them not expect anything, okay? You have to give them something. So when these guys also realize, like, it's the same with the anti-war people, right? If you run a campaign aggressively on being anti-war, some people are going to pay attention to that. Some people are going to believe that, okay? So when you say you're going to be based in anti-war, and then you don't actually turn around and be based in anti-war, some people will get frustrated with that. I know people who are ironically also on the Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy side, which is not even like a conspiracy theory in my opinion. It's just the truth. They're going to be frustrated with this. They're going to be like, where the info? What is this? What the hell is going on? Yeah, Bradley Martin is the example I was thinking of. For sure. And there are plenty of people like him. You have to remember, a part of the reason why I do this is because like there are a lot of people in the real world who operate like this.
Must be held accountable.
This administration wants anyone who has ever committed a crime to be held accountable. And I would argue this administration has done more to lock up bad guys than certainly the previous administration. And the Trump administration is committed to truth and to transparency. That's why the Attorney General and the FBI Director pledged at the president's direction to do an exhaustive review of all of the files related to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes and his death. And they put out a memo in conclusion of that review. There was material they did not release because, frankly, it was incredibly graphic and it contained child pornography, which is not something that's appropriate for public consumption. But they committed to an exhaustive investigation. That's what they did, and they provided the results of that. That's transparency.
Follow up on that,
Sure.
Caroline. Okay, so the FBI looks at the circumstances surrounding the death of Jeffrey Epstein. According to the report, this systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. So what happened to the Epstein client list that the Attorney General said she had on her desk?
Well, I think if you go back and look at what the Attorney General said in that interview, which was on your network on Fox News.
Got the quote.
Go ahead.
John Roberts said, DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen? And she said, it's sitting on my desk right now to review.
Yes, she was saying the entirety of all of the paperwork, all of the paper in relation to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. That's what the Attorney General was referring to, and I'll let her speak for that. But again, when it comes to the FBI and the Department of Justice, they are more than committed to ensuring that bad people are put behind bars. They have an operation going on right now called Summer Heat, which has our murder rate trending.
Yes, we just watched this. We just watched the last part of this.
Now the feud.
But yeah, before we get to Elon Musk and his new party, let's take a look at
Back to the
CoffeeZilla.
boy. Today we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein. The big update, which is just that he had no client list and offed himself. That's according to Axios. In a big scoop, they apparently got a hold of this document from the U.S. DOJ and FBI, kind of a joint statement.
Yeah, guys, you don't understand. So he was trafficking in no one and for no reason. Yeah. You don't understand. He was trafficking for no one, and he was just doing it for the love of the game. He was just like a serial sex trafficker and pedophile, but just for himself. And all of the people that were, that he was hanging out with, like, they all just happened to really like his vibes, and they were not clients of his. The hours and hours and hours of videotapes that were uncovered in the raid, because his house, all of his houses were taped, okay? All of his houses had a ton of security cameras everywhere, okay? And there were hours and hours of tapes that were recovered from these raids, and the tapes were named, like the tapes had names on them, right? But he was just a guy who loves videography, and he was just doing it for the love of the game. He was not filming people in his mansion doing sex crimes. Those people were just there because they loved chilling with Jeffrey, and they had no idea that he was even though he went to jail for it. What the hell?
We're going to go through it. They say, as a part of a commitment to transparency, the Department of Justice and Federal Bureau of Investigation have conducted an exhaustive review of the investigative holdings related to Jeffrey Epstein, sort of a relook at the evidence, if you will, and they come to some very interesting findings. And it's interesting in that it's contrary to what a lot of what they've been saying all along, and that's what's kind of the problem here. For the last few months, we've been teased along with these statements about, we've got the client list.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review.
We've got thousands of videos.
There are tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children or child.
And then, Kash Patel goes on Joe Rogan and says, hey, there ain't no videos. If I had a video of a guy on an island committing a felony, don't you think you know about it?
Again, logical play out. If there was a video.
Yeah, come on, Joe. Don't you trust me? Literally the least trustworthy looking person that they could have found to do this. This was so funny because, Kash Patel always looks stressed up. He just looks so unimaginably stressed, possibly on some kind of upper. He could be telling you what he ate at lunch, and I'd be like, dude, I don't think you ate whatever you're saying. You just look like a liar. No matter what you say, you look like you're a liar. But then on top of that, the things he was saying on the Joe Rogan Experience were so crazy that even the Joe Rogan stands were like, yeah, this is not going to float our boat. Doesn't trust me. Joe, do I look like an untrustworthy person to you? Do I look like, as a part of the FBI's directive, I would hide information about a potential member, an asset of the intelligence community that was engaging in a high-profile sex trafficking and blackmail operation, Joe? I would not. That's why I was like, nah, no shot, dog. These motherfuckers definitely hiding it.
Of some guy or gal committing felonies on an island, and I'm in charge. Don't you think you'd see it?
It's already. Seems
No.
like a bit of a contradiction.
No. Why would we? What have you done that would cause us to even have any confidence in you? What have you said or done that would instill confidence in me? You literally look like the least secure man in America, the least trustworthy man in America.
Contradiction. Now, Joe Rogan even tries to give him the out, like, oh, maybe you don't have it. And he's like, no, we're giving you everything.
If you have access to it.
If I have it, period.
Right.
If I have it.
Right. If you have it.
Right.
But you can't say that you have it.
No, we're giving you everything we have.
So far.
Everything we have so far is.
Have you guys gone over all the video that's available?
Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. That's what takes so much damn time.
And so there already was a wedge with what we were sort of told we're going to get versus then they come out and say, hey, nothing to see here. And today is a little bit more of that. It's a little bit more of the finger wagging at the conspiracy theorists, which is ironic given that both Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, who have now come out saying there's nothing to see here, guys, were saying, oh, there's a lot to see here before they got in.
Who killed Jeffrey Epstein?
This doesn't look right. It doesn't look like a suicide.
It's unbelievable. The guy himself.
Now, maybe that.
Yeah, one of the funniest aspects of this is literally that the people that they task with this are the people that also played a formative role in the public, increasing their curiosity. And I think this was a mistake. I think they legit thought, as long as we have these conspiracy theory guys that have developed significant audiences in these spaces, as long as they are the primary communicators, that people will trust them. People will just believe whatever the they say, not realizing that people care about this shit. Like, they care about it a lot more than they care about Dan Bongino. Why would they even give a shit about Dan Bongino? Who cares about Dan Bongino? The only reason why these people even developed an interest in what Dan Bongino was about was because he seemingly was trying to arrive at the truth.
That because they did a deep dive and they're just being honest with people.
Again, you want me to get, I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
But I think you deserve criticism if you're going to engage in this type of conspiracy.
Also, yeah, I mean, listen, Coffee, you're not thinking about how much Dan Bongino has suffered, okay? Think about how much Dan Bongino has suffered. I feel like this is really messed up that CoffeeZilla is hitting him with this when...
I mean, I gave up everything for this. I mean, you know, my wife is struggling. I'm not a victim. I'm not Jim Comey. It's fine. I did this, and I'm proud I did it. But if you think we're there for tea and crumpets, well, I mean, Cash is there all day. We share it. Our offices are linked. He turns on the faucet. I hear it. He's there. He gets in at like 6 o'clock in the morning. He doesn't leave till 7 at night.
Yeah, dude. I was a podcaster. You know, I was working in the trenches. Now I have to be in a tiny office, and I have to hear Kash Patel drop the nastiest shit in the room next door. Okay? Think about how terrible this is. Why does nobody care? Why doesn't anybody care about me? I don't get to see my family anymore. I used to see them when I was podcasting.
You know, I'm in there at 7:30 in the morning. He uses the gym. I work out in my apartment. But I stare at these four walls all day in D.C., you know, by myself, divorced from my wife. Not divorced, but I mean separated, divorced. And it's hard. I mean, you know, we love each other, and it's hard to be apart.
But you're doing some great work. You straighten out the FBI, you moving buildings. There's a lot of change.
I got one more thing. I mean, I gave up everything for this. I mean, you know.
He gave up everything for this, dude. I need you to understand something here. It's like, this is, if whichever the next Democratic administration is, like, put me in charge of the FBI, okay? If I'm the deputy director of the FBI. Like, quite literally, in order for you to understand how psychotic this is, it's as though Democrats came back in charge and then they put my ass as the deputy director of the FBI, okay? Because that's him. Dan Bongino is the me on the other side, okay? Think about how psychotic that is. Anyway, let's get back to the primary purpose of why they did this and how much of a failure it's been so far.
Thinking, and then when it's convenient for you, you expect the trust of the people. If you're the one saying, like, hey, those guys can't be trusted, you become that guy and you go, well, guys, you can trust me, right? When I'm going to say the exact same thing everyone's been saying this whole time. That's why it's so stupid. I mean, you guys set up all the wrong expectations. You told us we're going to reveal the truth, and now they're saying there's nothing to see here, and shame on you for thinking there was. And once again, this is more self-contradiction, because in this statement, we actually find immediately first page, second paragraph, saying that there's a large volume of images of Epstein, images and videos of victims who are either minors or appear to be minors. My question is, there's no one else in this statement. They admit.
Yeah, he was the one who was just doing all of the pedophilia. All of the people that have frequented his houses, they were always there for the vibes alone. Like, they were not there for the things that Jeffrey Epstein was doing. And also, given the density over numerous years, given the amount of times, like the amount of hours recorded in these tapes, someone must have randomly encountered Jeffrey Epstein doing the deed, right? Even if he was just doing it himself.
That Epstein harmed over 1,000 victims. So you got 1,000 people, either some form of evidence that he harmed.
Like, what? This is what's so crazy. It's like 1,000 plus victims. So Jeffrey did it just himself. In what time frame? 1,000 victims. Jeffrey did it just himself. He was just like a serial pedophile. While he was doing it so frequently, none of the people that were constantly going in and out, none of the wealthy clientele, well, not clientele, sorry, wealthy friends of Jeffrey Epstein that were going in and out of his house ever encountered this. Like former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, in 2016. Or even Kimball Musk, Elon Musk's brother, who was dating one of the girls that Jeffrey Epstein was flying around. Prince Andrew, Alan Dershowitz, Bill Clinton.
Nobody else was involved? Epstein's around the most powerful people on the planet. 1,000 victims. No, nobody else. There's images and videos. Apparently, that's what they say. Nobody else is on camera, right? Because otherwise, that would mean that the FBI director went on Joe Rogan and told a lie, told a little fib.
If there was a video of some guy or gal committing felonies on an island and I'm in charge, don't you think you'd see it?
No, I don't. Why would we think that you would reveal this information? What have you done so far that would lead us to believe that you would be an honest actor here? I don't think, and also I was right. We were right for not thinking you would actually reveal this information. Because like, go back to the video that I did on the Joe Rogan Experience with Kash Patel and Joe Rogan.
But he says he's going to get the evidence out. So how do you square this, right? There's 1,000 Was Epstein just filming himself the whole time for like, did he put it in the evidence box? I mean, that's the ridiculous thing about this. Why would you film yourself committing these acts? That's where the whole blackmail angle came from, was there's all these videos for what, right? And I'm sure those people, these powerful people, did not consent to being recorded. So what else was this being used for? It's just pretty amazing. This whole statement seems to absolve any third parties, saying that they really have nothing else that they can bring that would expose third parties to allegations of illegal wrongdoing. Saying later, this systemic review revealed no incriminating client list. Now, here's where I gotta say, like, yeah, what, you didn't find the little notebook that had the, like, every guy that did something wrong on it? Yeah, obviously that's probably not gonna exist, right? But if you have videos and somebody appears in the video doing something bad, it's not a client list, but that's a client, right? So I just find it so hard to believe. I just don't believe. I'm going to be honest. I do not believe that you had so many videos, apparently enough to catalog over 1,000 victims, and not a single other person other than Epstein appeared on any of them, right? He's friends with all these famous people. He got rich, and nobody knows how he got rich. People suspect that it was some form of blackmail, but the FBI seems to basically say this is a conspiracy theory. They say perpetuating unfounded theories about Epstein serves neither of those ends of combating child exploitation and bringing justice to victims. You know, I actually agree with that. I do think we have to be careful not to jump to, conspiracy theories. The problem is when you release contradictory evidence, it makes people think that you're hiding stuff. Like that is not being helped in this release. I don't know if they're saying, oh, we're being so transparent here. Seems like...
Okay, to be fair to the FBI, I'm going to say this once again, but like they worked really hard on this blackmail operation. So don't you think it's a little inappropriate to demand that they ruin years and years of sexual blackmail material that they worked actively to cultivate? They worked really hard on it. In their defense, Adam Sosnick defending the Epstein cover-up on PBD, are you not value-tained? Oh my God. Oh, I am so value-tained. I'm about to get even more value-tained. And also, prominent MAGA influencers are now coming out, like Robbie Starbuck. Pam Bondi said the Epstein client list was on her desk for review to release to the public just a few months ago. Now the DOJ she leads claims that there was no Epstein client list. Sorry, but this is unacceptable. Was she lying then or is she lying now? We deserve answers. Would you look at that? Elon Musk also posted this last night. What's the time? Oh, look, it's no one has been arrested o'clock again. The official Jeffrey Epstein pedophile arrest counter. I think Elon Musk is doing this because he knows full well that the Trump administration will never reveal this information, okay? Because I think he knows that every single person that's implicated in this is ultimately protected by the administration, by every administration. The entire purpose that the American government serves is to protect the super wealthy. That is their primary purpose here, chat. And Elon knows that he will never be implicated in this, or his brother will never be implicated in this, because they will never release this information. That's why he can posture like this. Here's a guy who has quite literally been around Ghislaine Maxwell at events. His brother directly dated a Jeffrey, one of the girls that were trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein, or one of the girls that were flown around by Jeffrey Epstein. His brother used to go to Jeffrey Epstein's mansion in New York, Kimball Musk. So he's just posturing this way to beef up his populist talking points to win support and take advantage of the chaos that the Trump administration is bringing about by cutting away at significant portions of the MAGA base that played a formative role in demanding these kinds of things. I'm just gonna show this one more time. Obviously, as far as the people that are implicated with Jeffrey Epstein or connected to Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump's connections to Jeffrey Epstein actually comes after. Okay, as recently as his last tenure, when he, like I said, brought up Alexander Acosta and made him the labor secretary. Alexander Acosta is the person that gave Jeffrey Epstein in his first sex trafficking charges, pedophile sex trafficking charges, a sweetheart plea deal that allowed him to literally leave the prison. Okay? Nothing. This has never happened before and has never happened since. Alexander Acosta, after the new revelations came out about Jeffrey Epstein, including his involvement in the prosecution, had to basically quietly resign from this position. That was Trump's labor secretary. Trump's initial involvement with Jeffrey Epstein was famously in the first case against Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein used Mar-a-Lago as a hunting ground for new victims. That's the case. Straight up. And now you got even DC Drano, Rogan O'Handley, admitting the White House used them for a publicity stunt. As one of the influencers who was given the now infamous Epstein binder, I want to share a few thoughts. I understand the rage people have for demanding the Epstein client list and arrest. Every influencer there that day feels the same anger watching elites get away with the most heinous crimes. We want justice, and almost all of us have called for the client list and arrest for years. We had no idea we would receive the Epstein binders that day. We were originally invited for a meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance in the White House, and that was it. We all paid for our flights and hotels out of pocket and carved out time to go. None of us even knew who else was invited. We ended up meeting with President Trump, Marco Rubio, RFK, Kash Patel, Caroline Leavitt, and basically half of Trump's cabinet in the Oval Office. We were honored to be invited. What a great honor. He's like, they used and abused those, man. This is f***ed up. There was no advance notice about binders or any other meetings except our meeting with JD. We had a surprise meeting with the Attorney General, and she handed us the Epstein file binders. We all heard on the news the night before that she would be releasing the Epstein files that day, so it was surreal to have a copy in our hands. The photo shoot was not planned. We were walking from the White House to the Eisenhower building, and about 50-plus photographers were waiting outside for the UK Prime Minister to arrive and meet with Trump. Myself and others held up the binders because we were enthusiastic about justice finally coming for the elites after living for 4 years under a rigged and stolen presidency. We were told a lot of the info. Dude, first of all, these guys are careerists, okay? That's the reason why they were celebrating. They were like, oh my God, my conspiratorial career has finally gotten me entry into the White House. I'm like, I have direct access to the administration. They don't give a about the truth. Everyone who actually cares about the Epstein case knew this, okay? And clearly, they never cared. Also, Jeffrey Epstein was murdered when Trump was the president. What are we talking about? It's not just Alexander Acosta. Jeffrey Epstein was killed in a federal facility when Trump was the president. These guys are so stupid and so goddamn delusional. I do not understand how you can be this delusional. It doesn't make any sense unless you believe the Trump administration when they say, no, you see, that's not what happened. He actually himself because he was really sad. Yeah, and now fell for it again award for the Hodge twins. I mean, they're the dumbest in the right-wing circle. I didn't vote for elite files to be protected. Yeah, there was also apparently 1 minute missing from the Jeffrey Epstein, alleged Jeffrey Epstein cell footage as well.
The first big release was a nothing burger.
Yeah, wouldn't you be sad if your former cop cellmate tried to kill you? That's why former cop roid monster, okay, tries to kill you, and then you're put on suicide, well, that was him attempting suicide, actually. He just, the official narrative is that he tried to kill himself once, so then they put him on suicide watch, but then just, video footage went away, and the guards were sleeping. Yeah. Officer Tartaglio.
Then they said they had, reviewing all of these videos. Then they say if we have videos of people committing crimes, we tell you about those. And then they say we have thousands of videos, but we're not going to show you them because there's nothing to see. There's nobody on there important. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Quote, we did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. In other words, there's nothing we found that would be useful for a future investigation. That's what I find so interesting. Like, I get if you don't want to accuse someone in a press release of something that you haven't accused someone of, like with criminal charges, right? I get it. That's kind of the Department of Justice's way. Even if they have a file on somebody, but they're not going to charge them, they redact their names usually. But in this case,
yeah, it's so interesting. Let's pack it up. It's just like the additional known affiliates were given a were basically struck from the official record in the subsequent plea bargain deal that Jeffrey Epstein took, if you recall, in the previous time he actually went and served a fake prison sentence. It's just like, yeah, no known affiliates. Actually, there's nothing. There's no information here because, like, clearly there's no client list. There's no official client list. So there's no official elite files that frequented any number of different Jeffrey Epstein mansions.
They're kind of saying we didn't find anything that we would. I mean, it's such a strongly worded statement. That's what's weird about it. Why wouldn't you just be vague if you had these pending cases, right? I find it so weird that the people in the FBI right now have come in with such a mission to, on the one hand, say, hey, we're going to be totally transparent. And then, oh, well, we're not going to show you that. We're not going to show you that. We don't want to re-victimize anyone. Okay, that's fine. But then how are you going to make a bunch of absolute statements that make no sense and contradict what you said earlier? Like, if you're saying we can't say anything, then don't say anything. Don't say, hey, we're going to tell you everything. Well, we actually cannot. We can't actually show you. And that kind of overconfidence extends to also their, pronouncement about, hey, there's nothing to see here as far as the death of Epstein, because they don't really show much new here. We knew that this footage of the common area existed. Basically, they showed 10-hour footage of the common area during the time at which this all would have happened, Epstein's death. And so this is supposed to be like the absolute bulletproof, to show everyone that, oh, there's no way that someone could have gotten in here. But this is not actually Epstein's door. So, I mean, I don't know the exact layout of the prison. I'm not going to pretend to know everything there. But this is no more proof.
You have a big mouth, Hassan. Please return to Turkey and try again.
Than we already had. We already knew this existed. The questions were about all the security malfunctions of the much more important cameras than just the common area. I'm not sure how a 10-hour video of a common area definitively proves anything new. That's what I'm saying. You can't come in and go, hey, we got this bombshell. It's what you already knew, right? That doesn't make sense. And also, we've confirmed there's over 1,000 victims. Don't know who by. I mean, like, only Epstein? Really? Look at the charges of Ghislaine Maxwell. I mean, it's insane. Are we saying they were all to Epstein? Every single one. Over 1,000 only for Epstein. The way he got his money, we have no idea. It doesn't make sense.
No, he was just a chill guy. That's why Lex Wexner, the founder of Victoria's Secret and L Brands, was just a homie and basically made Jeffrey Epstein be his money guy and have complete control over. Les Wexler allowed Jeffrey Epstein to control basically his entire finances because he was a chill guy and a money wizard,
So, yeah, an incredibly frustrating day for anyone who was expecting anything new from this.
Lex stole Victoria's Secret. He didn't found it. Oh, my bad. I thought he found it.
Administration coming in saying.
Yeah, or the Dersh. Look at all of the wonderful individuals that were surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. I mean,
they were going to clean house, get rid of the corruption, fight for truth, release the truth. You're not gonna catch me hiding a guy on an island, right? And so, I don't know. I was kind of stunned to see this report. I just thought, if you're going to say this, which, again, doesn't really say anything new, it's kind of like a backhanded, hey, stop being such a conspiracy theorist, guys. That is what I find strange. Just the absolute over-promising and delivering. I mean, again, if you're going to open source everything, okay, that's fine. If you're not going to open source everything, you're going to say, hey, we got to protect people, fine. Don't make a bunch of pronouncements and don't deliver on them. Just kind of a complete self-own here. But it's also what you get when you say for years that the deep state is hiding something and then you become the deep state.
Yeah, I mean, the deep state is the friends we made along the way. Here is Benny Johnson, February 2025. You say that the FBI has Epstein's list. They're sitting on it. Why is the FBI protecting the largest scale file pederast? Pederast?
You say that the FBI has Epstein's list. They're sitting on it. That doesn't seem like something you should do. You're protecting the world's foremost predator. That seems like an evil thing to do, regardless of who may be embarrassed in the release of that list. Why is the FBI protecting the greatest pederast, the largest scale pederast in human history?
Simple, because of who's on that list.
You say that the FBI has
Also, here is here's Jedediah Vance. Here is our boy JD. Our boy JD speaking on it, speaking facts. Okay, on Theo Vaughn.
Everybody in politics has a vice that's much worse than alcoholism, is the way that I put it. But we
release the list.
Seriously, we need to release the Epstein list. That is an important thing.
Here's a video of Trump saying he thinks the Epstein list has a lot of phony stuff in it.
Would you declassify the 9/11 files?
Yeah.
Would you declassify JFK files?
Yeah.
Would you,
I did a lot of it.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
All right.
I guess I would. I think that less so because, you don't know. You don't want to affect people's lives if it's...
Less so, I guess, less so. I mean, who amongst us haven't taken a short trip on the Lolita Express? My private plane is much nicer than Jeffrey's, Jeffy boys, but I have been on Jeffrey's plane before. Less so, lots of elite implicated. Some of y'all's faves will be implicated. Don't like it. Don't like that at all, obviously. Believe me, folks, don't like that.
Phony stuff in there because there's a lot of phony stuff with that whole world. But I think I would.
Let's see.
On pedophilia and blackmailing the most powerful
What do you mean we are built? Define that. Do you mean our entire country, our entire government, our entire FBI, CIA?
I'm saying this. Whoever,
or this is one little operation that
Adam,
they don't want to expose.
Whoever he was working for, Epstein, Mossad, CIA, everything. Apparently, the most powerful people on the world were flying to an island and having sex with underage kids because she said it. There's tens of thousands of hours of them doing it. If we're built on that and the most powerful people that are running the show are in charge, the guy's telling Cash Patel, the thing that you just read, shut up. Shut up about it. Hold on, you know who I am. He knows who I am. I want accountability for everybody. If it's Trump, if it's Bill Gates, if it's Bill Clinton, I don't give a shit. If it's the president of anything, expose them because, Adam, the truth has to come out.
Okay, so I only have one question for you,
yes,
my dear friend. I agree with you, but at what price?
Take a deep breath.
Okay. But hold on, hear me out. At what price?
At any price, Adam.
So you're saying to expose whatever happened on Epstein Island, you're...
Bro, what do you mean, at what price? What happened? Are your homies involved or something? Like, what? What do you mean? At what cost? Yeah, the cost is what? We get to know who the villains are at the cost of justice, at the cost of unearthing tremendous amounts of evil. I think it's a good cost.
To do whatever this looks like.
Yes.
Tear down the government. Expose all the secrets. Put America basically in harm's way just to find out what's up.
What do you mean, Adam?
Because these are the most powerful people in the world.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Oh, my... That's bullshit.
On this island.
Adam, so let the truth be told or the heavens fall. I don't care. Okay, well, Adam, and that's who Vincent O'Shana is. I am 100% accountability, and I don't give a... If that's what we were built on...
But at what price?
I don't give a shit. There is no
America?
Price. Guess what the price is, Adam? God.
So
God's the price.
You're
going to answer them anyway.
You want to rule a city of ashes.
I don't give a shit if it's built on pedophilia and raping kids. Yes, because...
You're being emotional.
No, I'm not. I'm being real.
You have to understand.
I'm being real.
The whole concept of do you want to cut your nose off to spite your face? There might be an issue. But do you want to cut your whole nose off and ruin your entire face because you care that much about this entire issue?
If the machine is running right now because files are running the show and they're telling him, shut the hell up because we're all pedophiles, knock it down. And my last thing, pal, what bothered me about what he said is we're not going to re-victimize the girls and the victims. We're not going to do it.
Cash?
Cash. Guess what? Nobody wants to see any girl. I don't want to see any kids, male, boy, underage. Blur them out. But who's the guy that's touching them? Who's the guy that's... This is a horrible...
I can't believe I'm in agreement with Vinny Redface over here. I mean, he's right. And he's getting that same tomato complexion he got when he was talking to me. But this time for good as opposed to for evil. I like that the defense here, the reasonable, quote unquote, reasonable defense here is basically saying, well, you know, the whole government's run by pedophiles, and this would be far too disruptive to the pedophile schemes that they have designed if we were to find out who the pedophiles are. It is what it is. Like, how do you not feel embarrassed saying that? Unless you yourself are personally one of the pedophiles or know someone who is one of the pedophiles. What would Epstein conspiracy theorists say about this fact pattern if it was about anyone other than Trump? Yeah, here are some of the Trump links to Jeffrey Epstein. Trump was quoted in a 2002 profile describing Epstein as a longtime friend and terrific guy about whom it is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them on the younger side. Trump was among the politicians and celebrities who hitched rides on the Epstein private plane in the 1990s. In 2019, shortly before Epstein's arrest on sex charges, longtime Trump advisor Steve Bannon prepped Epstein for a potential interview. Yeah, we've never gotten those tapes out either, by the way. Shouts out. Steve Bannon literally was potentially working with Jeffrey Epstein in a mock trial. Okay, there was that part too. Trump chose Labor Secretary in his first term, Alexander Acosta, who was a U.S. attorney who oversaw a sweetheart plea deal for Jeffrey Epstein that a judge later ruled illegal. Alan Dershowitz, a Trump supporter. Hold on. There is no world in which this many incidents. There's no world in which this many incidents do not lead people scrutinizing the individuals in charge. Okay, and I don't even know how the Trump administration is going to get away with this, if we're being honest. Epstein's 2019 occurred while he was in the custody of a Federal Bureau of Prison, an agency overseen by the time by Trump-appointed attorney Bill Barr. After a longtime Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested on sex trafficking charges in 2020, Trump told reporters, "I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, and I guess they lived in Palm Beach, but I wish her well, whatever it is." That's what he said. Trump waffled about whether he would declassify the Epstein files. We saw that already during a Fox interview, but the network edited out a portion of his answer. Trump appointed as Attorney General Bondi, who was Florida's attorneys general in 2019 to 2011 to 2019. A period of time when Jeffrey Epstein's plane records became public, victims' lawsuits were filed, and a lot of new evidence against Epstein surfaced, but she did not take action. Interesting. A lot happening here in the Epstein situation. Meanwhile, Elon Musk is using the Epstein situation, knowing full well that they'll never actually, Trump will never actually reveal this information. Pierce calling out Alina Habba over the list.
This case, in Epstein's case, it is
I have to pee.
disturbing. We have flight logs, we have information, names that will come out.
Is it going to be shocking?
I don't see how it's not shocking that there were so many individuals that were hidden and kept secret and not been held accountable. Let's talk about the reverse. I believe in accountability. So you have to now go through your process. Now, I won't say they're guilty until they go through their time in court. But again, now it's time for accountability. We have seen for so many years, Pierce, in this country, many investigations, subpoenas, testimonies in Congress, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a general frustration with accountability. We take it halfway, we don't take it home. And I really believe that now with Cash and Pam, there will be accountability. But in this case, in Epstein's case, it is incredibly disturbing. We have flight logs, we have information, names that will come out.
Is it going to be shocking?
Not for Alina. He looks worried. That's funny. Release the list, baby. Come on. Oh, no list, please. No list here. Nothing to be seen here. It's pretty wild that the far right expected Trump, the guy who Epstein himself described on tape as his best friend, to chase down Epstein's client list instead of just closing the case. Here is the Trump is a white hat file arguments coming in. Okay, this is something that I've joked about before. While I have joked about this being a possibility in the line of defense, it's still funny seeing it take place in real time. That's right. Trump DOJ investigated his ties to Epstein and found nothing. I love Trump. He's the best leader in our lifetime, maybe in history, but no one in MAGA thinks that he's not a / into incest. It's not ideal, but it's a flaw we live with, and I doubt he still acts on it. No one is perfect, but Trump comes awfully close. Move on. I like that, as I told you before, when people ask me, Hassan, do you think that, like, if Trump was outed as, like, a trans person, if Trump was actually, if he came out as trans, like, what would the MAGA supporters say? They would turn trans themselves, okay? If you think that there is anything that Donald Trump could do that would cause some of the most diehard, some of the most loyal fans to turn around and be like, yeah, this is a bridge too far for me, you're delusional. There is nothing that Trump could do that these guys would consider to be a bridge too far. Their loyalties will always lie with the big guy. Nobody's perfect. This is going to be one of the trickier conspiracy theories to wiggle their way out of. God bless, they're going for it. Exclusive analysis. Was Epstein video evidence destroyed by the Biden admin? Roger Stone claims Kash Patel is telling the truth, not covering up crimes because Epstein files and hard drives no longer exist. Oh, yeah. Who could also forget? Here's RFK Jr. openly saying straight up, I was on the plane.
On Jeffrey Epstein's jet, were you?
I was on Jeffrey Epstein's jet 2 times.
You weren't ever.
Yeah, you said it. Hey, Matt Wallace, since you saw the leaked files back in February, why don't you tell us what the White House won't?
We should start with the facts. Marxism has failed. Only 4 of the 34 long-term Marxist-Leninist states still exist today, with all of them having liberalized to notable degrees throughout the last 50 or so years. Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Benin, and more fell primitive communism without private property, communal ownership of resources, no state, no social classes, and no class conflict. From this period, private property and class society emerge. Subsequently, Neolithic societies emerge based on agriculture, as does private property. Engels' perception of historical development, however, is blatantly incorrect. His argument that in primitive societies land and resources were collectively owned holds no merit. Forager societies, including the Aceh, allowed for our modern standard of private property rights, not simply mere personal property. Beyond simple bows, axes, and cooking tools, which were individually owned, meat distribution was based on private individual ownership. The Shoshone and Andaman Islanders established individual private ownership over productive resources, such as bird nests, trees, or land, as well as other natural resources. If an Andaman Islander found a tree and informed his buddies about it, the tree was his and his alone. The Bear Lake Athabascans owned beaver dens and fishing sites on an individual basis as well, not communally or by kinship groups. The Dekitan of Alaska, the Northern Paiute, and the Enle had similar rules as all of the other aforementioned tribes. According to the economist Frederick L. Pryor, roughly 3/4 of ancient hunter-gatherer societies already had recognized private property ownership. If Engels' theory of private property is incorrect, then his theory of statehood can't be correct either, as the theory laid forward by Engels proposes the notion that the state emerges as the upholder of the propertied class. The state, according to Engels, would be emergent from class antagonism and be made to reinforce the ruling economic class's wishes to maintain control over the means of production. The Hiwi of Venezuela had hierarchical food distributions based on individual effort and social alliances, yet they had no formal state. The Natufians, a pre-agricultural society in the Levant, had heavy wealth stratification but no structured state apparatus to enforce class rule. The early Hawaiian chiefdoms had complex political structures before they fully developed private property systems, where chiefs controlled land but redistribution was based on kinship obligations rather than capitalist-style exploitation. And African groups, such as the Ashanti Empire, had strong governance but no clear economic class oppression. Social hierarchy just revolved around lineage rather than private ownership. Alongside the collapse of Engels' theory of the state accompanies the collapse of the predictive power of Marxism. Engels believed that communities such as the Ake were cooperating naturally, and that this is why they engaged in communal ownership, while the emergence of private property and class stratification sort of corrupted human relations. This is, again, laughable. The Ake's communal sharing was driven by a necessity, not altruism. The moment somebody became a burden, a widow, an orphan, a sick child, they were abandoned or killed. Communal ownership was strategic insurance against future hardship, not some innate communist ethos. Hunter-gatherers were not universally communist, nor were they proto-socialists in any way. They had varying degrees of property rights and social stratification, as can be seen by the very fact that different individuals from thousands upon thousands of years ago were buried with different extents of luxuries, which proves social stratification precedes Engels' predictions by a long shot. Frederick Pryor, previously mentioned, pointed out the following facts, which are impossible for Engels' theory to grapple with. While Engels argued that early human societies practiced communal ownership of land, territoriality, or the exclusive use of land, was observed in many foraging societies. For example, societies like the Kootenai had collective territoriality, but no private land ownership. Private claims on land, though not always economically significant, were frequently present in foraging societies. Around 40% of territorial societies had private claims on land, and in some cases, these claims were even economically important, such as in private fishing sites or trapping areas. Engels' theory also implies that private property developed alongside the growth of productive forces. This is easily disproven by the Yagan, a foraging society with a low level of development, where exclusive property rights over land and fishing areas were already established, meaning that the concept of private property isn't really tied to the development of agriculture or other high-level economic practices. Engels believed that private property emerged as a result of surplus production, particularly food. However, Pryor points out the fact that in societies with abundant food sources, for example, tropical regions or places where fish or animals were plentiful year-round, private food stocks were not always essential. In societies where food stocks could be gathered year-round, for example, there was no need for private food stocks. The Roman gens, cited by Engels as evidence of primitive communism within his book, also contradict his own ideas. The gens were a patrician institution which were exclusive to the aristocracy and functioned primarily as a means of maintaining noble lineage and property control. Engels fails to account for the fact that the plebeians were essentially entirely excluded from the gens, or the fact that the Roman hereditary kinship groups acted primarily as a mechanism to control and centralize political power and wealth. The Roman gens, from their earliest records, were completely tied to private land ownership and inheritance laws. This wasn't an emergent property from the gens that pops up later down the road. Engels conflates the Roman gens with the kinship structures of American indigenous societies like the Iroquois. The issue with this is that the Roman gens were not exogamous, matrilineal, or clan-based systems in the sense that the Iroquois system was. No, instead, the gens were based upon patrilineal descent and legal control over assets. All of this is very important, but Marxism has bigger fish to fry, such as its economic calculation problem. What is the economic calculation problem? The economic calculation problem, a mouthful, or ECP for short, is the central problem that underlies Marxism and its goals of a centrally planned economic system. The ECP posits that economies are too intricate and complex to possibly be solved by a centralized method of planning, causing efficiency to rapidly decline over time in a centralized system. Marxism responds by arguing that the ECP is a fundamental non-issue, which can be solved by modern technology and theoretical advances beyond what capitalist economists of the 20th century originally envisioned. The Marxists assert that the capitalist markets do not allocate resources efficiently and that price signals are neither necessary nor sufficient for rational economic calculation, and that instead of relying on capitalism, a planned economy which employs labor time accounting, computational optimization, or democratic decision-making across the entirety of society could be much better and eventually necessary for the human race. They contend that the reliance on price signals under capitalism causes inefficiency, contradictions, and crises. The boom-bust cycle is mentioned by Marx as one such failure where market speculation results in overinvestment in production and underinvestment in consumption, leading to eventual collapses. They argue that the 2008 financial crisis was a perfect demonstration of how capitalist markets are prone to self-destruction, which in theory should mean that the planned economic system succeeds in at least mitigating these crises. If price signals were as effective as capitalist theoreticians claimed, then why do these mass inefficiencies occur? Marxists argue that modern computational methods also render the ECP obsolete, as demonstrated even by the USSR's use of mathematical planning models in the mid-20th century. The failure of Soviet planning is attributed to bureaucratic inefficiencies and political mismanagement, not an inherent flaw in non-market resource allocation. They reject the notion that only competitive markets can generate the necessary information for economic calculation, arguing instead that socialist economies can adapt by incorporating feedback mechanisms and other methods of accounting for production. However, the Marxist theory completely fails in every single respect, indisputably. Rational economic calculation requires genuine price signals derived from voluntary exchange. Prices condense vast amounts of decentralized information, efficiently accounting for relative scarcities, opportunity costs, and consumer preference. Any non-market pricing mechanism is necessarily arbitrary. Planned economies, even when using computational optimization, fail to replicate market efficiency because they do not have any real exchange-based pricing mechanisms for capital goods. Socialist reliance on labor time accounting or predetermined quotas, the most popular method of economic planning for Marxists, pays no mind to the subjective nature of value or the complexity of consumer preference. Despite claims that modern computing has solved the ECP or the idea that this is possible through machine learning or other mechanisms, the sheer scale of economic calculation remains intractable. A centrally planned economy must account for trillions of interdependent decisions in real time, a problem exponentially more complex than even the most advanced supercomputers can handle. It took 18 years, from 1989 to 2007, for the Chinook computer program to succeed in solving the game of checkers, utilizing hundreds of computers working in unison. Finally, in 2007, the project, ran by the University of Alberta, came to a close, with the team having found 50 trillion possible positions. Chess, however, is a game at magnitudes more complex than checkers. It's estimated that there is this number of possible chess moves which can be made. This number exceeds even the amount of particles in the observable universe by a long shot, and still is merely just a game of chess, not even remotely comparable in scale to the complexity of an economy. If a computer program can't even attempt to solve the game of chess or come close to it, what makes the Marxists believe that their centrally planned economy will be able to account for the nuances of all of human economic engagement? Sheer delusion. Economic planners also have to account for the fact that they're often using imperfect or outdated data, which will always lead to systemic misallocation. The inefficiencies of the Soviet economy, despite its mathematical planning, are prime examples of this fundamental issue. Venezuela has attempted to utilize the algorithm and failed, as did the USSR. Total factor productivity, which refers to the total economic productivity with the efficient mobilization of both labor and capital resources accounted for, was parallel under both the Tsar of Russia and Stalin in the industrial sector, while in agriculture, Stalin fell far below the total factor productivity levels of the Tsar. It should be noted that despite producing multiple times as many grain harvesters as the USSR still failed to harvest as much grain and was in fact an import-dependent economy in that regard. The problem with central economies, as pointed out by Joseph S. Berliner in his journal article Innovation and Central Economic Planning, isn't just the economic calculation problem, but the issue with incentive structures that is exacerbated under command economies. Innovation in any economy requires new inputs, suppliers, and technical adaptations, but the centralized allocation system creates supply constraints. Supply constraints discourage enterprises from experimenting with new technologies. In a planned economy, inputs are allocated based on long-term production plans. Enterprises will receive fixed quotas, and deviations from these allocations, such as needing new materials for an innovative product, will require bureaucratic approval, which delays implementation. In a market economy, however, prices and demand shifts signal resource allocation. A planned economy, as previously covered in depth, doesn't have this dynamic adjustment ability, and so if an enterprise wants to introduce new innovation through new products or processes, it may not be able to receive necessary inputs to achieve this innovation because the national plan didn't succeed in anticipating such a need. Furthermore, if a factory even does succeed in innovation, if the innovation requires any specialized parts, it has to wait for central planners to adjust supply schedules to accommodate this, which could take years. If an enterprise cannot rely on a steady and flexible supply of inputs for experimentation, then they're just going to avoid innovation altogether. While communists are correct when they say that most research and development is typically heavily related to the state or funded by the state in some manner, the problem which has just been mentioned means that this doesn't even really matter in the first place, because even when new technologies are developed in centrally planned systems, attaining the necessary materials and equipment for implementation on the production level is just yet another bureaucratic hurdle. Cost-based pricing, another staple of centrally planned economies, is also a failure, since pricing new products at their production cost rather than potential market values disincentivizes firms to develop new technologies, since they won't reap the financial rewards of their improvements. After Marx's death, in March of 1895, Engels admitted in his introduction to Karl Marx's Class Struggles in France, 1848 to 1850, the following. But history has shown us too to have been wrong, has revealed our point of view at that time as an illusion. It has done even more. It hasn't merely dispelled the erroneous notions we then held, it has also completely transformed the conditions under which the proletariat has to fight. The mode of struggle of 1848 is today obsolete in every respect, and this is a point which deserves closer examination on the present occasion. History has proved us wrong, and all who thought like us. It has made it clear that the state of economic development on the continent at that time was not, by a long way, ripe for the elimination of capitalist production. It has proved this by the economic revolution, which since 1848 has seized the whole of the continent, and has caused big industry to take real root in France, Austria, Hungary, Poland, and recently in Russia, while it has made Germany positively an industrial country of the first rank. All on a capitalist basis, which in the year 1848, therefore, still had a great capacity for expansion. What do these excerpts mean? They mean that Marxism was wrong. History had completely disproven several fundamental original Marxist assumptions. The revolutionary predictions of Marxism had collapsed, and its methodology had failed entirely to adequately forecast historical development. Engels acknowledges that capitalism, contrary to Marxism's predictions, was not by now collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions, but instead flourishing, industrializing vast parts of Germany, Austria, Russia, and Poland. Engels' admission that the proletariat was too underdeveloped and that capitalism was still incomplete by the 1890s means that the Communist Manifesto's initial urgency wasn't only premature, but outright false. Engels further confesses that the Marxists were entirely incorrect in their attempts to apply the revolutionary models of the 1789 and 1830 bourgeoisie revolutions to the proletarian revolution, and even that revolutionary methods such as sudden uprisings, insurrections, and barricades against the capitalist order were now obsolete in every single respect. This is a striking admission by Engels that the revolutionary tactics which had been at the heart of Marxism were no longer viable whatsoever. The materialist conception of history laid out in the Communist Manifesto should have explained history scientifically and been able to predict future social development. Yet, Engels admits now, 4 months before his death, when writing this, that Marxism had ultimately misjudged the unfolding of history entirely, as well as the complexity of economic change. This was nothing short of a call to rethink the entire system on Engels' part, but it was too late, and he would die by August of 1995, a failure with a fracturing pseudo-intellectual crowd of anti-Western factionalists as his legacy. In the end, it wasn't capitalism, but Marxism that collapsed under the weight of contradiction. Everything you think you know about the relationship between the Soviets and the Nazis before, during, and after World War II is incorrect. Many people know about the Non-Aggression Pact signed between these two nations, known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and many more do not. Many know of the brief period of supposed neutrality which existed between these two nations, from the late 30s to the early 40s, while others downplay this as the Soviet Union merely buying time before it could attack the Nazis when they weren't looking. But what are the facts behind this intriguing era, and just how deep does the rabbit hole go? Before we discuss at any length the relationship between the Soviet state and the Third Reich, we have to lay down precedent. Precedent which is to be found in the arm of Stalinism in Germany, the Communist Party of Germany, or the KPD for short, which was dominated by the influence of Stalinism through individuals such as Ernst Thälmann, who led the party. Before being banned in 1933, the Stalinist KPD had tried its very best to befriend the Nazis in every way that they could. The anti-Social Democratic Party referendum in Prussia was backed by not only Hitler's Nazis, but by the KPD, which publicly announced on July 22nd of 1931 that it would join the Nazi-initiated plebiscite in order to overthrow the SPD government. On November 1st of 1931, the KPD newspaper Rote Fahne published an open letter to the, quote, fellow workers of the Nazi Party and its stormtroopers, declaring the Nazis to be honest fighters against the hunger system. But this collaboration wasn't new, which one ought to find extremely surprising, at least at first. The fact was that not just in 1930, 1931, and 1932, but going way back into 1924, the KPD of Germany voted on the same side as the Nazi Party in the Reichstag 7 times out of 10. The KPD, the NVP, and the Nazi Party ended up aligning the most frequently out of all of the parties in the Reichstag, followed by the close alignment of the Social Democrats and Catholic Ascension Party, which themselves tended to vote together as a bloc. There were more votes shared between the Nazi Party and the KPD than between any combination of the other parties within the German government at any point since 1924. Throughout the entire period of 1924 to 1932, between the 197 votes taken by the government, in 145 of those votes, the KPD aligned themselves with the Nazi Party. KPD leaflets took up statements such as "down with the Jewish Republic" to appease Nazi voters as well. Pravda, the official newspaper of Soviet Russia, having heard of the new events, expressed that the rise of the Nazis could only mean that new millions have awakened from their political winter sleep. Early in the 1930s, the quasi-Nazistic strategy of the KPD had its greatest outward expression in the creation of the communist-aligned Scheringerstaffel in Linden, Germany. This unit was headed by Richard Scheringer, a German lieutenant formerly belonging to the National Socialist Party. In March of 1931, after leaving prison, Scheringer was again in the news, as he had been before, for his move from the National Socialist Party to the Communist Party. The Scheringerstaffel unit went so far as to wear SA uniforms, which were then adorned with symbols of the Soviet Union as part of Richard Scheringer's attempt to bring National Socialists into the Communist Party. The KPD would use his example to encourage other members of the National Socialists to join the Communists. What is being shown in front of you on screen now is an image of a KPD militia known as the Rote Front in Dresden in February of 1933. One can only guess where the Communists gained the inspiration for such a march from. The KPD strategy would become known as the Scheringer Kurz strategy, mixing Marxist and Nazistic elements to appeal to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Rudolf Diels, the first head of the Gestapo, pointed out that in Berlin, 70% of the new recruits to the Nazis' militant SA since January of 1933 had been former militants of the Communist Party of Germany. One of the most interesting facts provided by Diels was that entire KPD Rote Front units had been moved into the Nazis' SA. Albert Gruszinski, social democrat and head of the Berlin police between 1930 and 1932, pointed out that around a third of the members of the SA in Berlin were ex-communists as early as 1932. Hans Bernd Gesivius, an undercover member of the opposition to the Nazi regime and part of the secret police, noted that at least one-third of SA members in 1933 were former Communist Party members. These SA members were known as Nazi Rindersteak, or beefsteak, in reference to them being brown shirts on the outside and red Marxists on the inside. The SA themselves calculated that 50% of their members had come from the ranks of the communists, and reports from both the Gestapo and KPD intelligence confirmed a considerable presence of former communists within the SA. For example, in the Altona district of Hamburg, between 30 and 50 of the SA's 50 members had been communists before, including the right hand of the leader of Altona SS unit. A KPD propaganda piece meant to attract Nazi sympathy can be seen here, and an image of two National Socialist and KPD members on strike together should be seen here. This photo was taken from the 1932 Berlin transport strike, where both the Communist RGO and National Socialist Factory Cell organization worked together with KPD and Nazi street fighters, blocking depots, fighting the police, and sabotaging BVG service, sometimes together. Despite being nominally against the Nazis, leader of the KPD, Ernst Thälmann, himself believed that the Nazis should be allowed to rise to power first to make a communist revolution in Germany more politically expedient. Importantly, Joseph Stalin, when Hitler finally did rise to power, did absolutely nothing to oppose the rise of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, despite the large presence of the KPD, which took directive directly from him. Stalin lost his ideological grip over the nation entirely, as the KPD was quickly banned by the Reich government in 1933. So much for internationalism. Let's fast forward about 6 years to Berlin on April 17th of 1939, after the Treaty of Rapallo, where the Russian ambassador reported to the State Secretary of the Third Reich, "There exists, for Russia, no reason why she, Germany, should not live with us on a normal footing, and from normal, the relations might become better and better." In August of 1939, as German Foreign Minister Ribbentrop prepared to visit Moscow, the German ambassador reported that Soviet Foreign Commissar Molotov was unusually receptive. Von der Schulenburg cabled Berlin that Molotov found the invitation very flattering, an actual proof of our good intentions, and clearly expressed a wish to conclude a non-aggression pact. Joseph Stalin would state on August 23rd of 1939, "I know how much the German nation loves its Führer. I should therefore like to drink to his health." Hitler would invade Poland on September 1st of 1939, and 7 days later, Molotov, the lead diplomat of Russia, would relay to the German ambassador, "Please convey my congratulations and greetings to the German Reich government on the entry of German troops into Warsaw." Russia quickly allowed Germany to circumvent the economic blockade which Britain had placed upon the country, which had temporarily isolated it. In the secret agreement of September 28th of 1939, Russia gave Nazi Germany unrestricted usage of Soviet territory and railways to receive goods from Romania, Iran, Afghanistan, and China. Stalin prepared a secret naval base known as Basis Nord in the Kola region to support German raiders, while Soviet ships opened the Northern Sea route for German vessels. Indeed, the German commerce raider Comet took this Arctic Sea route via Soviet waters to attack Allied shipping in late 1940. Soviet railways and ports likewise carried German supplies. For example, Soviet Ukraine was a transit route for Romanian oil bound for Germany. As the German Foreign Ministry official Karl Schnurr stated, "Our sole economic connection with Iran, Afghanistan, Manchukuo, Japan, and also with South America is the route across Russia, which is being used to an increasing extent for German raw material imports." Pravda, mind you, the leading Soviet publication of the era, editorialized on September 30th of 1939, "There's no justification for a war between France and Britain on the one side and Germany on the other, a war which is quite meaningless. It is up to France and Britain to end a war which was begun against the will of their peoples." It added, "The hostility which the imperialist warmongers have fomented between the two greatest countries in Europe," of course referring to Nazi Germany and the USSR, "is now at an end." In January of 1940, it released a paper which stated, "The war was declared by Britain and France. The peace proposals were not rejected by Germany, but by Britain and France, who insist not only on continuing the war, but on spreading it." If Russia had cut off Germany from the usage of its railway lines, Germany would have absolutely no way to import from almost any nation around the world, and the war would have been over years sooner than 1945. However, Russia pursued the most friendly and welcoming relations which it possibly could have, therefore delegitimizing the stance propped up by modern communists that Russia was going to betray Germany eventually. Trust me, it just needed more time. Stalin expressed in the most explicit manner, contrary to the aforementioned sentiment, his desire to befriend the Axis powers, particularly the Japanese imperialists, as lead Japanese diplomat and Minister of Foreign Affairs Yosuke Matsuoko reported. "Then Stalin publicly asked for me, and when he found me, he came up to me and threw his arm around my shoulders, saying, 'We must remain friends, and you must now do everything to that end.'" Somewhat later, Stalin turned to the German acting military attaché, Colonel Kurbs. First made sure that he was German, and then said to him, "We will remain friends with you in any event." One could brush these off as simple diplomatic words of appeasement if it weren't for quite literally everything else Stalin and his administration did to maintain their relationship with the Reich, such as declaring that waging war for a destruction of Hitlerism was in fact a criminal act. Soviet diplomat V.M. Molotov on October 31st of 1939 stated, "One may accept or reject the ideology of Hitlerism, as well as any other ideological system. That's a matter of political views. But everybody should understand that an ideology can be destroyed by force, that it cannot be eliminated by war. It's therefore not only senseless, but criminal to wage such a war as a war for the destruction of Hitlerism, camouflaged as a fight for democracy." If all of this weren't enough, in a twisted turn of events, the Soviets would give Germany 43,054 Polish prisoners, or 33% of all of the Poles who had ever been captured by the Soviet military up until that point in the war. Many of these Poles would find their ways into Nazi concentration camps where they would perish. In 1940, a trade agreement was organized between Nazi Germany and the USSR, which benefited the Reich's economy immensely, as the rubber and zinc which the Reich obtained from Russia was as important to them as Russia's timber was important to the Brits. Joseph Stalin stated, almost hilariously to Karl von Ritter, "If we, Russia and Germany, go on collaborating like this for another 4 or 5 years, Russia will be able to produce enough raw materials to supply 2 Germanys." On the other hand, Pravda, on February 18th of 1940, released a publication which stated, "All the agreements reached between Germany and the USSR during the last 3 months, the Non-Aggression Pact, the Boundary and Friendship Treaty, and lastly the Economic Agreement, have established a solid and lasting basis for the development of cordial economic and political relations between the two states. They fully correspond to the basic interests of the German and Soviet peoples, to the interests of peace, and to the interests of the popular masses in every country." Karl Schnur ran the calculations of the balance sheet for the trade agreement between the USSR and Nazi Germany and found that the deliveries were set well to the benefit of Germany, as in a single year, Soviet grain deliveries to Germany were 1 million tons, as well as 900,000 tons of oil and more than 500 tons of metal ore. Even the day before Operation Barbarossa, a Soviet train carrying 2,100 tons of rubber entered into the Reich to deliver it to the armed forces. Soviet Russia, despite Nazi Germany's intentional delays in holding up its end of the bargain throughout the course of the agreement, stayed faithful and true to its new Nazi compatriots in delivering absolutely all resources which it had promised up until the very day it was betrayed by the Nazis in Operation Barbarossa. In an interview on September 14th of 1945, Prince Kono of Japan would state, again in September, Stammer, the German ambassador to Tokyo, informed the Japanese government that the German-Soviet agreement had worked out remarkably well and that it had been faithfully carried out by Russia right up to the delivery of the last drop of oil. Ribbentrop brought confirmation to the words expressed by Prince Kono regarding Karl Stammer's report in a conversation with Benito Mussolini, the Prime Minister of Fascist Italy, stating, "In confidence, the Reich Foreign Minister can announce that Russia is being very generous in supplying raw materials and is using some of her own gold to buy raw materials which Germany needs." Archival reports do well to show us the scale of Soviet shipments to Germany. By late 1940, one German diplomat reported, Russia has supplied over 300 million Reichsmarks worth of raw materials, roughly 100,000 of which was grain to Germany, while only 150 million Reichsmarks in German goods returned. He adds that this transfer was at the expense of the Russians' own consumption. The Soviets were eating into their own stocks to meet German needs. Overall, deliveries included hundreds of thousands of tons of grain, oil, cotton, metals, timber, etc. In the first year of the 1940 pact alone, Moscow committed about 650 million Reichsmarks worth of exports to Germany. Though less public, some collaboration on military intelligence and training occurred. German and Soviet military attachés exchanged assessments, while earlier in the 1930s, the USSR had secretly hosted German tank and air training. After 1939, Stalin reportedly invited Wehrmacht generals to brief Red Army officers. Most interestingly, Stalin's own military staff included a number of German advisors in 1940 to 1941, and Red Army officers collected German manuals. At a minimum, the two regimes, at least to our knowledge, coordinated on radio intercepts of Poland and France. The Soviet Union released an entire book entitled Falsifiers of History, in which it falsified history, and attempted to debunk the obvious relations which it held with the Nazi government between 1939 and 1941. Within the prologue, the government admits that it resisted the publication of German documents which exposed the Reich's ties to the USSR under the impression that public knowledge of the coalition would make the general public more anti-communist. Falsifiers of History spends the entirety of its first chapter complaining about how the Allied powers were hesitant to resist Hitler and how Western private businesses worked with the Reich in a sad attempt to excuse the Soviet Union's own alliance with the Nazis after the war had already started. The Soviet Union then claims that it alone was doing everything in order to block the fascist aggressor's way, a flagrant lie as Russia broke away from the Allies and joined the Axis powers to pursue war conditions which benefited it more. The Soviet diplomat Viktor Israelian commented, "History's falsifiers certainly did nothing to disprove the existence of Soviet-German cooperation in the first years of World War II, a cooperation that to a certain degree assisted Hitler's plan." In 1939, Stalin personally began to oversee the purge of leading Jewish Soviet officials, including two prominent Jewish commissars, party leader Artemian Ryeltin and the foreign commissioner Maxim Litvinov. Yiddish cultural institutions were already being curtailed by 1939, and by 1940 to 41, only a few Yiddish newspapers and theaters remained, and any hint of Jewish self-organization was suppressed. In the 1940 elections to the Supreme Soviet of the USSR from Western Ukraine, White Russia, and Poland, not a single Jew was elected to the Supreme Soviet despite its 750 seats available, and within the occupied territories which the USSR had conquered, not one Jew had been placed into a single important position of power. An unexplained drop in the number of Jews in office over the previous year had occurred. During this time, mentions of the Nazi suppression of Jewish individuals had been eliminated from the press entirely as Soviet leaders began to embrace anti-Semitism. Nikolai Ivanovich Gusarov, the first secretary of the Belarusian Communist Party, complained on February 17th of 1940 that only one theater in the Belarusian Republic, a Jewish one, puts on unpatriotic plays in which life in America is praised. After the Hitler-Stalin Pact in 1939, 1 million Jews fled to Russia to escape Hitler, and in September of 1940, 10,000 GPU agents captured and deported these Jews to Siberia. Hardly any food was supplied during the 4-week trip to Siberia, where their suffering was just beginning. Hitler would eventually betray Stalin, but even throughout early reports from the armed forces and civilians, which warned that German ships were leaving Soviet harbors, Stalin ignored these as subversive rumors until it was too late. Hitler's betrayal, however, would ultimately be his undoing, as the Red Army would be marching into Berlin by spring of 1945. Following the defeat of the Nazi dictatorship, the Soviet military administration in Germany erected a network of special camps, as they were called. These special camps were built on the bones of nothing other than old Nazi prisons and concentration camps. Between May of 1945 and January 6th of 1950, 10 principal camps held upwards of 157,000 detainees under direct control of the NKVD and later the MVD. These were death camps of malnutrition, disease, and utter isolation. Under NKVD Order Number 00315, April 18th of 1945, Soviet authorities were to round up anybody deemed a hostile element. Some former Nazis, some suspected werewolf youths, while others were social democrats, landowners resisting the theft of their property by the Soviet Empire, journalists, or simply anybody suspected of anti-Soviet activity. No evidence was required because arrests were purely administrative, without any judicial oversight required. Detainees were classed either as interned with no trial, or, in a minority of cases, sentenced by a Soviet military tribunal whose trial took about 15 to 20 minutes on average. From the moment they arrived, prisoners were wrenched from the world with no mail or visitors allowed. Tuberculosis, dysentery, typhus, and dystrophy ran rampant. Although they received standard rations compared to the rest of the Soviet-occupied zones, they had no black markets, so inmates starved. Unlike Nazi camps, there was no forced labor, but that only compounded the stagnation and physical decline. By late 1946, camp populations peaked at over 80,000 men, women, and even children, as many as 10,000 youth under 18. Half of these youth never returned. In the first half of 1947 alone, 31,404 individuals had died, 60,774 remained alive but debilitated, 43% were suffering from serious illnesses such as dystrophy, tuberculosis, or open wounds. Officially, 43,035 people died. Only 45,261 were ever freed. The remainder were deported to the Gulag or reclassified as prisoners of war, or alternatively handed over to East German authorities. 756 were executed outright. Few dared to speak. In 1946, Eugen Kogan noted in Der SS Stat that the NKVD camps had become a mirror image of Nazi brutality, stating, anyone suspected of being a state enemy, agent of a foreign power, class enemy, or kulak was seized. The only difference was that they were not gassed, but starvation, disease, and isolation did their work. Others, like Franz Neumann, observed on an SPD platform in 1948, the camps are the same, but in 1948, the hammer and the sickle have replaced the swastika. After the war, Ernest, a Jewish publishing house, was shut down by the state. Ennenkite, the only Yiddish daily paper, was suspended as well. Not one Yiddish newspaper or publishing house existed anywhere in Russia by mid-1949, and critics who held Jewish ancestry, such as Johann Altmann, a theater critic, were targeted in Stalin's anti-cosmopolitan campaign. Johann Altmann was denounced as a double dealer, a man with the dark soul of a traitor, a servant of the imperialist West, a diversionist in art. Of the 50 or so intellectuals attacked by the USSR between mid-February and April of 1949 under the anti-cosmopolitan campaign, 49 of them were Jewish. Pravda, referring to cosmopolitans on January 28th of 1949, released a paper stating, "They penetrate our press and operate most freely in the pages of the magazine, theater, and the newspaper. They represent a rootless cosmopolitanism which is deeply repulsive and inimical to Soviet man. They obstruct the development of Soviet literature. The feeling of national Soviet pride is alien to them." Between July 17th and 27th of 1949, dozens of Jewish editors of Russian ran papers in occupied territories, such as Berliner Tägliche Rundschau, Der Abend, Die Volkstime, Ostreichscher, I'm not going to say that, Zeitung, and Volkswatch were unanimously dismissed from their posts. The chief editor of the Volkstime, a Jew, supposedly committed suicide, while the chief editor of Abend, a Jew as well, was arrested and deported. The National Democratic Party of East Germany, NDPD for short, would be founded in 1948 by the former SS officer Wilhelm Adam. It would attain 35 seats in the East German legislature in 1950, becoming the fifth most powerful party in East Germany out of 12 total parties in the legislature. Stalin had suggested that the Nazi paper, known as the People's Observer, be revived as an official newspaper of the National Democratic Party of East Germany to appeal to former Nazis, a proposal which was in the end rejected, of course. Starting in 1951, Stalin's security organs had alleged that a cabal of prominent Jewish doctors was planning to poison top Soviet leaders, inspired, of course, by the medieval blood libel that Jews secretly poisoned Christian wells during the Black Death. 6 of the 9 accused physicians were Jewish, portrayed by Pravda as inhuman beasts, exploiting their medical roles to commit assassinations. Official dispatches warned of, and I quote, an international Jewish bourgeoisie nationalist organization recruiting saboteur doctors on behalf of U.S. and British intelligence. Arrested doctors were to be beaten relentlessly. At their core, German National Socialism and Stalinist communism were nothing less than ideological siblings. Beneath the aesthetic of power was an admiration of organized terror against society for the sake of exalting some pure segment of the nation, be it race or class, agreeing that this end, however brutal, justified the purge of their own people to reshape civilization in their own distorted image. Consider the steps taken by these ideologues to appease each other in practice. These weren't choices made for mere political convenience. When Stalin's purges against the Jews began to echo Hitler's blood libel rhetoric, and when East Germany's National Democratic Party began to recycle old SS officers, the mask finally slipped and revealed that at the end of the day, the communist system trafficked in the same currency of fear, exclusion, and control. History's lesson is unfortunate. Communism and Nazism, though dressed in different colors, marched to the same drumbeat, wielding their ideologies not as outreached hands, but as hammers against the aspirations of their own people. Syria is in grave danger. Since the fall of the dictator Bashar al-Assad, a new government has taken power and been hailed by the international liberal order as ushering in a golden age of freedom in the country. However, this praise is misguided, to say the least. The new leader of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, known also by his alias al-Julani, is not who he claims to be. Prior to founding his own militant organization in 2013, Ahmed was a significant member of al-Qaeda and was also one of the founding figures of the Islamic State. The purported liberalization of his ruling HTS has been nothing more than a calculated deception which was intended to earn international legitimacy, a legitimacy that the HTS's members have since forsaken. The reality is that Shara was effectively a member of ISIS from his earliest militant days until 2013. As many know, Shara was a veteran of al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI, and their insurgency against American forces in 2003. AQI was the continuation of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's JTJ, also known as Jama'at, a group in which al-Shara had been an important member. Originally established in 1999 and later merging voluntarily into al-Qaeda, JTJ was where al-Shara became a close friend and confidant of al-Zarqawi. In 2003, during the Iraq War, Ahmed al-Shara was captured by American forces and detained at Camp Bucca, where he developed a personal relationship with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, his cellmate, and the man who would later declare himself as caliph in 2014. After al-Zarqawi's death in 2006, AQI was rebranded as the Islamic State in Iraq under al-Baghdadi's leadership, though it continued to be known as AQI until its expansion into Syria. The Islamic State in Iraq, or ISI, then established the al-Nusra Front as its Syrian branch under al-Julani's command, initially giving him control over about 50 fighters. Al-Nusra then quickly evolves into a broader coalition which acts as a high command for a handful of Islamic militant organizations in the region, including the Islamic State-aligned Caucasus Emirate. In essence, Ahmed al-Shara answered directly to Baghdadi. To put everything I've just said simply, al-Julani's original al-Nusra was conceived as a project solely intended to extend the Islamic State's influence into Syria, a designation that was confirmed by the United States government in 2012, with al-Baghdadi entrusting him with command over ISI, or Islamic State Iraq assets in Syria, such as the Caucasus Emirate. In fact, Western intelligence initially referred to al-Nusra as Islamic State Syria, or ISS for short. Al-Julani's decision to break away from the Islamic State only came from his desire to avoid long-term subordination to al-Baghdadi and to establish an independent organization. The Syrian Salvation Government, which preceded al-Shara's eventual control over the entirety of Syria, adopted the Syrian independence flag emblazoned with the Islamic Shahada as its national emblem. In the earliest days of the Syrian transitional government, following Assad's overthrow last year, the Tawhid flag, the symbol of Islamic theocratic statehood, was used alongside the Syrian independence flag. Although I'd be surprised if people are still unaware of this fact by now, but upon overthrowing Assad, al-Shara, acting as the de facto leader, unilaterally declared himself as president of Syria, has dismissed parliament indefinitely and abolished the constitution, announcing that it will take up to 3 years to draft a new constitution and 4 years to hold new elections. Those were his initial announcements, though the suspension of elections has since been extended to more than 5 years. On December 8th, the day of Assad's overthrow, one of Shira's first acts was to deliver a speech at the Great Mosque of Damascus proclaiming a new chapter in Syrian history. Beginning in Idlib and now spreading to other major cities, the ruling HTS has imposed severe restrictions on women's dress code, mobility, and public participation. Women are required to be accompanied by a male guardian in public, and violations of these rules can result in fines or detention. In an interview with Lebanon's Al Jadid TV, the chief of political affairs of Syria, Obaida Arnaout, announced that women will henceforth be excluded from certain aspects of public life due to their biological, psychological, and mental characteristics. Especially alarming is the appointment of Syria's new chief of women's affairs. Al-Debs, who heads this department, has publicly praised Hamas, mourned the death of its leaders, described the revolution against Assad as inherently jihadist, has rejected the notion of gender equality, arguing that secularism has harmed women, and stated that feminism will no longer be tolerated in a post-Assad Syria. Meanwhile, HTS member Shadi al-Waisi, formerly a judge for al-Nusra, and recorded on video ordering the execution of Syrian women for violating Islamic law, has been promoted as the Minister of Justice under al-Shara. Additionally, Abdulaziz Dawood Kudberdi, commander of the Turkestan Islamic Party, has been appointed as a brigadier general, as have many other Islamist militants from Jordan, Turkey, Xinjiang, Egypt, and Albania. Over the course of this very weekend, the Druze people have begun to face notably increasing aggression from the Syrian government. Israeli authorities, who grant special protection to the Druze, have demanded the defense of Druze settlements near Damascus, including in areas such as Jarmana, where violent incidents, which have been instigated by the Syrian security forces, have already been resulting in casualties. Gunmen from nearby suburbs have been harassing local Druze defenders, while in Swaida, the Druze have been resisting handing over their weapons in defiance against the new Islamic regime. Many are happy to see the overthrow of Assad. However, the fact is that without decisive intervention, Syria is on the track to suffer a fate similar to that of Iran and Afghanistan, where long-standing social freedoms were entirely eradicated following the rise of jihadist regimes, which have, in the region, consistently been far worse than their preceding secular regimes across the board. Unless international intervention occurs, or a miraculous victory by remaining Ba'athist insurgents is achieved, one can only hope that such international pressure might at least temper the actions of this emerging jihadist dictatorship for the sake of the Syrian people. Pierre Joseph Prudon may be rightfully credited as the single greatest thinker to emerge from 19th century France. Having first influenced a young Karl Marx, having founded the political term anarchism itself, and having later inspired Russian, Italian, and French socialist and syndicalist thinkers, Proudhon in his era represented the most practical current of left-wing political thought. But what did he believe? To answer this question, I will be making an attempt to analyze the ideology of the father of anarchism in more depth than any other channel ever has in a single video. To even begin to answer the question of what Proudhon believed and what his theories entailed, we need to first define what anarchism meant to Proudhon. In his first major works from 1840 to 1846, Proudhon ruthlessly critiqued government as a corrupt instrument of privilege. He refused to identify as a monarchist, a democrat, or an aristocrat, claiming only the identity of anarchist. At that time, he saw all governments, monarchies, republics, or dictatorships as enemies of liberty. Of Economic Contradictions, written in 1846, Proudhon argued that the state necessarily reproduces social inequalities. Thus, in 1840 to 1846, being the delegated heads of the various public services industrial groups. Groups, corporations, and territorial districts are all, in fact, true ministers. In other words, deputies would be chosen by industry groups and local communes, making them simultaneously legislators and administrators. By having all representatives drawn from economic and territorial categories and subject to recall at any time, they form together the nation's convention, ministry, council of state, and legislature all at once. This arrangement was a reflection of Prudhon's doctrine that power should mirror the society's economic structure. He even argued that to make universal suffrage intelligent, it is necessary to have citizens vote by categories of functions, in accordance with the principle of collective force which forms the basis of society and the state. In plain terms, he believed universal suffrage should not be a mass anonymous vote, but rather an election organized by categories of function such as job, guild, or region. In other words, instead of one person, one vote, one territory, votes would flow through functional federations to balance competing interests such as workers and capitalists by tying deputies to their group's economic rules, thus ensuring interdependence. The third point, which was important to Prudhon's idealized republic, was the assurance of political guarantees designed to protect individual freedoms such as the freedom of speech and press, legislative initiative, freedom of assembly and association, the inviolability of the individual, the home and private writings, etc. Fourth, administrative decentralization accompanied by a revival of localized city life. Fifth, and finally included the abolition of standing armies, as Prudhon expected, perhaps naively, that within socialized society, the spirit of struggle would transfer from the battlefield to the workplace, imbued into the production processes within the economy, thus ending wars between states. Prudhon believed this form of genuine republican government to be an abolition of the state, as to Prudhon, the state was definitionally nothing other than a repressive centralization of authority over the masses, which it falsely proclaimed to represent. Within this understanding, through the new form of republican governance, the state is absorbed into society, swallowed by it in the totality of the social being, putting an end to taxation, simplifying the bloated bodies of bureaucratic administration, and centralizing each economic class of functions separately, thereby organizing universal suffrage in a proper manner. One could very much argue that Prudhon doesn't, in fact, abolish the nation-state in his theory, and in connection with Pierre Leroux, Prudhon admits that from a certain standpoint, this can be viewed as true. Within Prudhon's system, mutual credit societies would emerge in every town, allowing workers and farmers to borrow without usury. Above them, a central bank of the people would exist for public interest, run by delegates from all industries. This People's Bank would discount producers' bills and circulate its notes at par. Each subscriber is obliged to accept in all payments the paper of the bank of exchange. The effect would be interest-free credit. Since the bank's notes are backed by goods themselves, not gold, the members need only reimburse in kind, abolishing usury and freeing trade from gold's royalty over society. All associations, economic and political, were to be voluntary contracts. A truly democratic pact must be, to Prudhon, commutative. Each party gives as much as it gains and retains its sovereignty over all else. In his book, The Federative Principle, published in 1863, he writes, for example, that when citizens enter any association, the citizen must receive as much from the state as he sacrifices to it. Thus regulated and understood, the political contract is what Prudhon calls the federation. Federation is, of course, to Prudhon, a pact among free communes or groups, each keeping more rights than it gives up. The federal authority only handles specific common functions, with its delegates strictly agents of the member groups. A true confederation isn't precisely a state, it's a league of autonomous entities, and the so-called federal authority isn't a government, but an agency created by the states to perform common services. Factories, farms, and workshops would form local co-ops that link by contract into larger regional and national federations. This network would replace the capitalist market and the unitary state. Taken in its entirety, Prudhon's mutualism means liberty in exchange, free contract, free competition among producers, and credit provided by the people themselves. To Prudon, the social revolution would come not by seizing state power, but by association under the golden rule: do not do to others what you would not want done to you, do the good you would wish to receive. Previously mentioned in passing very briefly, and central to Prudhon's ideological framework, was the concept of struggle. Prudhon espouses struggle and conflict and the tension which emerges from this conflict as the manner in which society progresses. Struggle determines by the trial of strength through various methods, including battles of arms, which of two or more contending powers engaging in conflict are superior. The struggle between Hercules and Eurystheus, between authority and liberty, between revolution and tradition, these represent the constant poles around which society is constantly moving and organizing itself. Because of this doctrine of Prudhon's philosophy, the world is always in a permanent state of change and revolution, regardless of whether or not we would like it to be. Prudon, in his book Peace and War, states, "War, a still more false philanthropy, showed us nothing but a frightful scourge, the explosion of our innate wickedness and the manifestation of heavenly wrath. War is the most incorruptible expression of our conscience, the act which, in the final analysis, and in spite of the impure influence that is mixed with it, honors us most before creation and before the eternal." To Prudon, even battle was a beautiful ideal to uphold. Not only this, but it laid down the framework for the very basis of civilization itself in his view, as only through struggle and its resolutions would the human race ever continue to evolve. On the other hand, the pacification of society into a state of consumerist and inactive stupor would mark its deterioration and eventual collapse, as without conflict, no resolution, and therefore no advancement could ever occur. Prudon begins his book War and Peace by asserting that war, like religion and justice, is an intrinsic moral phenomenon, not a merely external physical conflict. He writes that war, like religion and justice, is in humanity a phenomenon more internal than external, a fact of moral life. In his view, war is rooted in the depths of human conscience and encompasses in its idea the universality of human relations. By this he means that war gives rise to and reveals almost every human institution: religion, law, art, economics, politics, even classes such as nobility and bourgeoisie. Prudon declares that through war, nations are regenerated, states find balance, progress continues, justice establishes its rule, and liberty finds its guarantees. To remove the idea of war, Prudon argues, is to extinguish all meaning in human history and civilization. Prudon thus elevates war as a fundamental form of our reason, a law of our soul, and a condition of our existence akin to time, space, beauty, or justice. It is almost a metaphysical given to Prudon, a divine law of society. War's inevitability is portrayed by Prudon in cosmic terms. He states, "I'm not afraid to say it. War is eternal. Hail to war. It is through it that man, scarcely risen from the mud, asserts himself in his majesty and his bravery." When he calls hail to war, Prudon isn't celebrating wanton violence. It's the heroic struggle that for him brings mankind out of brutishness and towards nobility. Philosophically, then, war is for Prudon a divine and primordial reality. He declares war is divine, that is to say primordial, essential to life. It has its source in the depths of consciousness. Contrary to the common view of war as immoral murder, Prudon argues that true war is morally justified. He rejects the notion that a warrior is either a hero or a brigand, depending on the justness of his cause. Instead, Prudon argues that true war is no more unjust on one side than the other. It is on both sides, and necessarily just, virtuous, moral, and sacred. In other words, genuine warfare as a juridical act embodies justice on both sides and even attains a sacred character. By this very paradoxical criterion, war elevates rights instead of abolishes them. When two armies fight honorably and the honorability of the combatants and the presumption of right are equal, each side may claim the moral high ground. Death on the battlefield is, in Prudon's framing, the crowning of life, a noble end for a free, intelligent human being. Prudon observes that unlike animals that fight merely as instinct, human war is infused with conscience and justice. Wolves and lions make war only on other species, but they don't wage war amongst themselves, while among humans, war alone has produced civilization, freedom, and progress. Prudon argues that without pride in heroism, the pride and spirit of valor in conflict, humanity would have sunk to the level of purely industrious, peaceful animals. And so, for Prudon, war brings out humanity's chivalry and our capacity for justice and heroism. This conviction leads Prudon to embrace war with almost a theological commitment. He anticipates the pacifist objection that war is murder. He calls this an abominable sophism to equate honorable war with mere homicide. In Prudon's account, it is not war that falsifies conscience, but the pacifists who disregard the human conscience, which they do not understand. The fact that states are founded on bloody conquest is a puzzle that Prudon throws back at the critic. For him, the moral order itself has emerged from war. Sociologically, Prudon saw war as a fundamental institution of human society. It was more than an occasional outbreak of violence. It was to him a principle, an institution, a belief, a doctrine that permeates civilizations. One could find the true foundations of society to Prudon by chronicling the development of both law and war alongside each other throughout history. In fact, he argues the common view that war is arbitrary conflict is completely incorrect. The law of nations, in his view, is essentially the outcome of martial struggle, the first expression of rights being determined by which side's force or right prevails. The jurists who deny any right of war misunderstand that war itself creates new rights by establishing victors and vanquished. Regardless, Prudon is also attentive to how society resists war's brutality. Every social group instinctively seeks to avoid deadly slaughter, even as it depends on conflict for meaning. Prudon frames this as the fundamental contradiction of society. Our very progress depends on struggle, but we flee its excesses. He writes that without war, civilization falls into the void, and the very idea of human progress becomes meaningless. But since people flee war and tend towards peace, there is an enduring problem to solve. Beyond literal war, Prudon famously claimed that society is based on persistent contradictions or antagonisms at every level. Any attempt to eliminate conflict is for him akin to destroying humanity entirely. His concept of federalism is in part an attempt to channel antagonisms without eradicating them, and so war in Prudon's vision has its analog in the peaceful but inexorable clashes of interests within society. He says there is struggle or lutte before any stable resolution. Before a new social order, there is necessarily a fight. Even institutions like religion and justice arise from conflict. In Prudon's De la Justice, for example, he portrays the Church Militante as an inherently warlike organization, conquering souls and opposing false ideas as though on a battlefield. Moreover, Prudon argues that war, or latent war, is what ultimately disciplines society. In Justice in the Revolution, he warns that a society lacking faith turns into a deadly struggle where the law of the strongest is replaced by the law of the most cunning, ending inevitably in servitude to tyranny. In this view, the absence of any moral sanction renders all relations warlike, and the end of conflict would paradoxically be servitude and tyranny itself. So all in all, social life thrives on struggle. Out of warlike antagonism emerges any balance of power or justice we achieve. A conflict that simply destroys both sides isn't a war, but a subversion, an anomaly in the social order. The healthy war, by contrast, preserves a dynamic equilibrium. Prudon's positive stance on war is created by his dialectical view of history. It was his belief that humanity is perfectible, born capable of progress, but that progress requires perpetual effort and conflict. War is one mode of this struggle. In War and Peace, Prudon argued that if war truly ceased everywhere, civilization would become inert. This is something that's already been covered, but it needs emphasis. Ending antagonism means ending the world to Prudon. Regardless, Prudon doesn't glorify pointless massacre. He makes a distinction between war as massacre and war as production of peace. In his sociology of war, the just war is one carried out under equal rules and rights. If antagonism is the social law, as he believes it is, it needs to be checked by justice. Prudon scorns the jurists who say there is no law of war. He argued that war itself has its own positive law, consecrated by victory, which imposes itself on the vanquished as surely as a court's judgment does. Prudon's dialectical approach means that each struggle brings synthesis. After war, a new balance is struck and society is renewed or regenerated. Antagonism is itself creative. The end goal of humanity is progress, which only through continual confrontation of opposites proceeds. Any attempt to impose a static peace would reverse said progress. Hence, he provocatively claims that peace without war lacks substance. Yet, the tension between war and peace, the will to reconcile conflict, is itself what pushes civilization forward. Starting in 1848, disappointed by the revolutionary incapacity of the working class on its own accord, Prudon believed that the middle class, the property-owning class, and the workers ought to merge their interests together, as it has been said, into a singular force for the progressive movement of the revolution against the government. It was the revolution of 1848 that first drew Prudon into politics and led him to seek a compromise with the middle classes. In 1849, it was clear that a balance, a class entente, so to speak, between the middle class and the working class could not yet be achieved quite at that point, yet Prudon had strongly stated that the proletariat and the middle class, divided right now by the selfishness of their respective tendencies, are in essence of one mind on principles as well as on aims and on means. In the general idea of the revolution, written in 1851, he addressed the bourgeoisie as the elder sons of the revolution, praising them for advancing liberty and urging them to side with the people. As he states, "Save the people, save yourselves, as did your fathers through the revolution." Many academics posit that by 1865, Prudon had lost his faith in the class alliance and had begun to advocate for a solely proletarian revolution. This, however, is false, as in his 1865 book, The Political Capacity of the Working Class, he counseled workers not to abolish all bourgeoisie rights. He wrote that workers should not destroy the middle classes, but win the same liberty of action that the bourgeoisie enjoy. He urged the industrialists and liberal politicians to defend societal progress, warning workers against smashing the middle class. and instead instructing workers to treat the latter as, quote, our elder brother in emancipation. On top of this, Prudon points out that liberalism, an ideology of the middle class, has ever since its founding resisted the authority of the government in favor of individual freedoms, and argued that liberal philosophy and non-Marxian socialism complement each other as two halves of one singular whole against oppressive government. This class entente envisioned by Prudon shows itself to have been a necessity, as all successful revolutions have required the coordination of not only the working class but the business-owning class to succeed as well, whether that be under Lenin's new economic policy, Mao Zedong's new democracy, or any of the other popular revolutions against the systems of old times. In line with this all-inclusive view of the base of society, Prudon believed that representative political institutions within a nation must be founded upon the inclusion of every social and political element, which can express itself freely and obtain justice, achieving its own influence and sovereignty. This healthy, pluralistic ideal of representation would later be emulated in the goals of the syndicalists of France, who would emerge only a few decades after Prudhon's death in 1865. To Prudon, to live properly meant to abandon the excess of pleasure and to pursue frugal, modest living. In his own words, poverty is not ease. It is not good for man to live in ease. It is clear that it would be misplaced to dream of escaping from the inevitable poverty that is the law of our nature and of society. Poverty is good, and we must regard it as the principle of our joy. Reason commands us to align our lives with it through frugality of manners, moderation in pleasures, diligence at work, and the absolute subordination of our appetites to justice. This existence recalls the archetypal modest hero of ancient Western literature, or the idealized brave warrior class of Plato's Republic. As Plato stated, but when the cobbler or any other man whom nature designed to be a traitor, having his heart lifted up by wealth or strength or the number of his followers or any like advantage, attempts to force his way into the class of warriors for which he is unfitted, and either to take the implements or the duties of the other, then I think you will agree with me in saying that this interchange and this meddling of one with another is the ruin of the state. Another ancient Western thinker, which this ideal of modesty recalls, is the Spartan lawgiver Lycurgus, who called for all men to stand in solidarity with one another in complete poverty. To Lycurgus, by continuing poor and not coveting each man to be greater than his fellows, one best defends their society against those attempting to destroy it. Prudon was a radical opponent of hyper-intellectualism during his life. He once stated, "The idea, with its categories, is born from action and must return to action, otherwise the agent decays." To Prudon, all meaningful knowledge emerges from the necessities of actual life and labor, not due to spontaneous divine revelations, as posited by religion. Therefore, the thought of the Platonists, where the highest life was spent pondering the abstract forms, was in fact nothing short of a farce, a lie. To live purely in abstraction and in the realm of intellect bore little fruit to the only life which genuinely matters, the only life you know for a fact you are going to live. The form of thought which is genuinely meaningful is only that which can be practically applied, directly or otherwise indirectly, to the production processes which help all of humankind. Prudon, with all of his brilliant ideas, made countless blunders, among them his summarization of the various phases of capitalism. Prudon, as he expressed in his book, The Stock Exchange Speculator's Manual, believed that capitalism would have various phases which have now been proven to be at least partially outdated. First and foremost was industrial anarchy, whereby an era of the free market and competition was established, an era of capitalism idolized by conservative liberal thinkers today. What emerged from industrial anarchy was industrial feudalism, which oversaw the establishment of trusts and cartels. Industrial empire, a period which lasted until the 1960s and 1970s, would be classified by the centralization of private enterprise under authoritarian leadership on a mass scale, embodied in Prudhon's era under the leadership of Napoleon III, where the head of the state was nothing other than the head of large corporations. Prudon believed that after the rise of industrial empire, industrial democracy would occur, the last stage he bothered to predict, as participation of the masses within the government and the self-management of the workers would be curated. This, however, is a proven falsehood. Industrial democracy did not succeed the rise of industrial empire, as the empire has been stripped of its industry under an era of neoliberalism, making the very category of industrial empire completely outdated. On the other hand, the classification of the development of capitalism by Prudon up until that point does still stand as true. Another error of Prudon was his belief that once free mutual credit banks and federations were established, as he says, the revolution externally will consist in preaching by example, with no need for conquest or armies. This, however, has proven to be not the case, even or especially within fully realized socialist revolutions. Within Economic Contradictions, we encounter another error of Prudon, where he states that the role of the woman is the responsibility for the management of the household, for everything related to consumption and saving inferior to that of the man, whose proper function is the command of the workshop, that is, the government of production and exchange. Here is perhaps Prudhon's worst mistake. Although he touts the concept of universal suffrage, when personally inquired about his opinion on women, not only in his book Economic Contradictions, but also in his more insufferable work, The Pornocracy of Women, Prudon expresses his absolute hatred towards them. While Prudhon's racism is another horribly thrown problem, it's never anywhere near as prominent within any of his works as his, albeit still infrequently referenced, misogyny is. Upon further consideration, in fact, it actually has to be said that his prejudice towards women was not, in fact, his most egregious stance. Prudon was among the foremost rabid anti-Semitic theoreticians of political thought in Europe during the 19th century, stating in his private journal, in a text known as On the Jews, written in 1847, that the Jew is the enemy of humankind. They must be sent back to Asia or be exterminated. Although this was one of Prudhon's earlier works, and this extreme level of anti-Semitism never finds its way into any of his later works, it does leave a dull mark on his legacy, which he could never make up for in any of his grand reasonings or his brilliant economic treatises. The truth is that Prudhon's hatred of capitalism was, according to him, one-to-one with his hatred of the Jew, while at the same time his commitment to libertarian social order never did extend to gender or racial equality. Historical context can, in part, explain why he thought such things, but it doesn't entirely excuse them. But unlike many other reactionaries in history, Prudon knew his views to be backwards and stupid. As he stated, "I dream of a republic where I would be guillotined as a reactionary." As Prudon acknowledged, his cultural positions influenced by his background within a reactionary family were not and could never be progressive, hoping others would never pursue the adoption of them. In Prudon, we find a man who acknowledges that his ideals are those of an antiquated past long forgotten, and yet also lacks the will to break free of them, a slave to his own sentiments. What was the relationship between Pierre Joseph Prudon and Karl Marx? In 1842, Karl Marx publicly praised Prudhon's work, What is Property, first published 2 years prior. He declared that Prudhon had produced a penetrating work that required prolonged and profound studies to critique. In his book The Holy Family, published 3 years later, in 1845, Marx hailed Prudhon as the embodiment of proletarian thought, comparing him to Sieyès in the French Revolution. However, by 1846, Prudon and Marx began to split over their views on the urgency of revolution. Prior to their split, the overlap between the two had already been astounding. In Prudon's System of Economic Contradictions, written in 1846, he engaged in a dialectical analysis of capitalism influenced by Hegelianism. Though Marx later mocked Prudon's Hegelianism in his 1847 hit piece, The Poverty of Philosophy, he had, oddly enough, in fact, encouraged Prudon's approach when they were allies in 1844. Marx attacks Prudon's dialectics as idealist, though, as Georges Gurevich notes, Marx's attack on Prudon was in part a proxy for Marx's break with Hegel himself. Prudon marked up his own personal copy of Marx's 1847 Poverty of Philosophy, a book dedicated to defaming Prudon. After Marx's scathing Poverty of Philosophy, Prudon called it a tissue of crudities, slanders, and falsifications. Within his markups, Prudon accused Marx of inversion of his own previous ideas, charging Marx with simply inverting Prudon's federalism into dictatorship, one aristocratic sovereignty for another. Despite this, Marx later acknowledged What is Property as epoch-making, in his own words, in his 1865 letter to Scheibwitzer. Marx indeed borrowed the conceptual framework of class struggle and value from Prudon's writings, as well as from the economists, which Prudon knew, while discarding of Prudon's liberal mutualism for state socialism. Prudon's famous phrase that property is theft found its mirror in Marx's view that private property and the means of production underpinned class oppression. Both men used dialectical reasoning about historical progress, and it is pretty undeniable that Prudon's notion of history as a series of revolutions finds its echoes in Marx's materialism. Prudon can first and foremost be thanked for introducing the concept of surplus labor value utilized by Marx in Das Kapital, originally conceived of within Prudon's first book, What is Property. In Prudon's What is Property, Prudon already argues that capitalists exploit workers by appropriating the collective force, as he calls it, generated by labor collaboration, which remains unpaid. Marx expands upon this concept in Capital, but he never still acknowledges Prudon's influence, likely due to the rift between the two socialist thinkers, which started in 1846. Not only this, but the distinction of utopian and scientific socialism, emphasized and expanded upon within the theories of Engels and Marx, was only first envisioned within Prudon's writings, with scientific socialism being mentioned within What is Property years before its first usage by any communist theoretician. Marx himself acknowledges in Capital, written in 1867, that he derived the labor value approach, what he later calls surplus value, from the classical economists, including Adam Smith and Ricardo. And even from Sismondi, though he never names Prudon. The truth is that quite a few ideas of Prudhon's other than this were taken by Karl Marx, who then bastardized said concepts in the name of establishing his own theory of communism. For Karl Marx, when communism was to be finally actualized, man and society would be fully reconciled, ending conflict and beginning an era of all working towards the good of mankind. Prudon is right and in line with a genuine scientific tradition when he upholds the fact that there is no society in which all problems are solved. In no revolution has less contradiction emerged within society, for the fact that society is constantly in a state of becoming, always transient and changing. Prudon's theory of mutualism, an extremely faulty theory though it may be, was never intended to be the final stage of society. For Prudon, there is no end to history. There is no final solution. There are only new questions, new problems, new struggles, and this is a great thing. Within Prudonian thought, struggle keeps the world turning. It creates progress and makes men active. Jean Lacroix is correct when stating that while Marx represents an authoritarianism whereby mankind must overcome all contradictions and suppress all opposition, by its own nature opposing everything which does not adhere to its pedantic dogmatism, Prudon's philosophy represents a humanist ideology which recognizes that all oppositions will never be overcome and that humanity is in a perpetual state of tension, and the only way society can achieve genuine peace is through the balance of competing interests. Therein lies the fundamental break, which shows the superiority of Prudon over Karl Marx. Prudonian philosophy allowed diversity and a genuine liberalism, whereas Marxism, in its drive to overcome contradiction, must by definition result in the homogenization of society and cannot allow variety. But wasn't it Marxism which first actualized socialist political thought on a large scale? In part, yes, but the Marxists wouldn't have had as much success without Prudon's legacy. As pointed out by George Esgorovich, who was an organizer of the Russian Soviets of 1917, in his article Prudon and Marx, the first Soviets within Russia were organized by Prudonians who emerged from the Socialist Revolutionary Party. It was not merely Marx, but the heavy influence of Prudon who inspired the revolution in Russia, which at least temporarily overcame Tsardom. Marx, although praising Prudon in his youth, later came to loathe him, attempting to write him off as simply another theorist from the petite bourgeoisie. Only Prudon was not merely a member of the petite bourgeoisie, he had been a member of the peasantry of France. Marx's hatred of Prudon led him to take up a radical anti-communist stance, demonstrated in the following excerpts. In his book, Economic Contradictions, Prudon stated, "Far from me, communists, your presence is a stench to me." And in his book on the political capacity of the working class, he states, "Thus the communists followed suit. They reduce everything to the sovereignty of the people, to the right of the collectivity. Their notion of power or the state is absolutely the same as that of their former masters." Regardless of Marx's hatred of Prudon, the fact is that there would be no Marxism without Prudon. Karl Marx's work was saturated by Prudon's ideas, even as Marx turned against him. The frequency of the very terms fetishism and contradiction appear in both authors' vocabularies an astounding number of times. As the anthropologist Warlam Cherkasov noted in 1900, many of the ideas that Marx had claimed as original, such as his labor theory of value, class conflict, etc., had already been developed by Prudon and others far earlier. Prudon was in many ways a mediator of socialist ideas, channeling the thought of Saint Simonianism as well as Ricardian thought. Marx simply tapped into that reservoir. Prudon's critique of interest-bearing credit and his advocacy of mutual banks was a prefiguration of Marx's critique of the financial forms of capital, for example, and Prudon's call for workers' associations and cooperatives was simply a prototype of Marx's vision of communistic organization. Even Marx himself once admitted his critique of political economy owed much to Prudon's analysis, and so Marx absorbed terms and analyses from Prudon before turning to attack him to assert his own originality. Prudon lamented Marx's blatant plagiarizing of his own contributions. In personal notes and later writings, Prudon would criticize Marx and Engels for repackaging what had originally been mutualist and Ricardian concepts as novel ideas. Prudon's carnets contain side-by-side comparisons of passages from his own works and Marx's so that the readers may observe the overlap. For example, Prudon's model of wages set at subsistence, or the law of the 3-franc wage, is simply stolen by Marx's law of values. Marx even ripped off Prudon's phrase, contradictions of political economy. There's no doubt that Marx's lexicon of exploitation, value, alienation, class, and of course revolution is completely stolen from the socialists such as Prudon, who came far before him. Regardless of Prudon's vitriolic social takes and his confused theory of morality, in his philosophy of man and his theory of governance and economics, we find the most well-developed and practical alternative to communism and commercial capitalism out of any theorist who lived and wrote during the entirety of the 1800s. Frequently buried behind the scathing words of Karl Marx, Prudon has never been given the credit he is due, as not only a brilliant political theorist, but an inspiration to hundreds of thousands of forward-thinking individuals, providing the ideological backdrop to dozens of revolutions around the globe. In the year 1914, decades after his death in 1865, the socialist theorist Georges Sorel would comment on Prudon's legacy personally, stating, Extreme left-wing journalists discussed him without respect, as if he were an old comrade who had gone astray, while academics saw him as a paradoxical writer, victim of all of the impulses of his polemical talent. Even today, his memory remains so full of the errors, illusions, and sweet dreams of his early comrades that few people allow themselves to see in him what he truly was, namely the greatest French philosopher of the 19th century. They happened previously, so I think the only groups that the Republicans are ostracizing through this bill are ones that already didn't like them.
Interesting. So I guess, that's a good way to look at it. I guess 2026, do you think there's enough of a backlash, especially in regards to the Senate, where you see a short-term backlash, whether media incentive or just because of the bill itself? Do you think there's enough of a sticky consequence, especially in the Senate seats, that 2028 becomes sort of a, I guess, war for the presidency in the House, but the Senate is like democratically controlled?
Maybe.
Mr. Joshua?
I'd be very impressed to see Democrats secure a majority in either the House or the Senate in 2026. They might in the Senate, but that's very, very optimistic still. Trump has lost a lot of his support and approval that he had in the beginning of his term, that he had in the last 4 years. But I don't think it's enough to bring the Democrats back into a win. The Big Beautiful Bill has also put in tax cuts for lower income brackets as well, even though it has disproportionately benefited the upper brackets. It has also eliminated tax loopholes, which were previously in place. The no tax on tips is in the bill. I have read it. I've seen a few Democratic sources saying it's not there. It is. The benefits there under Section 71401 establish a 10 billion year per year grant program until 2030 for public rural health projects. So that's gonna make Republicans even more popular in the rural sections than they already were, and as those regions get more electoral votes over time, I mean, this is just dooming the Democrats. Benefits have been expanded, so SNAP's excess shelter deduction under the Big Beautiful Bill can no longer include any fees associated with internet service. So, like, broadband bills won't affect food stamps assistance anymore. So, like, among people who are on food stamps, this is, even though the amount of people who are on it will be shrunk, it's going to be a big benefit. I see a lot of these actually benefiting the way Republicans are viewed in the next few years, rather than otherwise. It is true that the Big Beautiful Bill is going to expand wealth disparities and wealth income inequalities, but I don't think this is going to be very convincing to the average person, being that this is already the trajectory of the United States since the 70s, is expanding wealth inequality. So, yeah, I know a lot of people on the left are like, oh, this is definitely going to just totally destroy Trump. I don't think so. I think the most unappealing thing in there for Republican voters to have to grapple with is the expansive Indo-Pacific military spending that's going on, that is really going to lose them the support of a lot of isolationists.
Nice. Well, we have an unrelated question in the chat that I thought I would ask you. It's from WJB. I believe he was having a conversation about marriage a few minutes ago, and about putting the question to his significant other. So I hope this stream gets you the courage to ask them to marry you. But regardless, that was not the question. I mean, that is a question, but not this question. His question was, what are your thoughts on Zionism and the creation of the State of Israel?
I am a Zionist. I think that the people of Israel deserve a home, and that won't be provided by any of the other parties that surround Israel right now.
Interesting. Where do you see, I guess a follow-up to that one is, where do you see this ending right now with, I guess, Netanyahu's cabinet and the war generally? I guess, which comes first for you?
Where do I see things going with Netanyahu's cabinet and then the Gaza war? In Netanyahu's cabinet, I think it's possible that Ben-Gvir is given, and his faction has enough popularity in the future to become significant enough to dissolve the government if it doesn't get its wishes granted. That's definitely a danger. But as for the Gaza war, I think it's hard to say right now because there are factions in the Israeli government that don't want Gaza to continue to exist, but international observers might stop that from things from going that far. It's also likely that Gaza ceases to exist entirely. And in that case, the Palestinians would likely be moved to Jordan or Egypt if they don't go into the West Bank. I don't know that I see Palestine as viable at all in the future. Fatah it had a good thing going for a while, but it's dissolved into too many factions and splinters that there isn't really any Fatah anymore, and the government of the West Bank, or of Palestinian Authority, is not very equipped to handle the rise of extreme elements in its territory. So we'll see how feasible the Palestinian state is. I think if there's a more popular secular uprising that occurs, then things will possibly take a better turn. But right now, the rise of extremism among the Palestinian population makes it very unlikely that they're going to continue to keep their home. That's not a comment on whether or not they should. I would be all for a two-state solution. But right now, it's not very feasible. And post-2013, it hasn't really been.
Interesting. I mean, obviously, I'm kind of personally like I've been discussing this topic for like weeks at this point, and like I think there's a bigger consensus more than there ever has been, at least personally, that like people are now, at least in plurality form, sort of not exactly responding favorably to Israel. But regardless, there's a related question that's sort of a joke, but not really, from Theodore Vey. I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He said, "What are your thoughts on AI English Hitler?"
I don't know. Interesting stuff, man. I don't know. What are my thoughts supposed to be? I'm revolted. I'm disgusted. How could they do this?
Say something.
I'm giving up on you.
Okay, that's a great song. And also, don't get us copyright claimed. There's actually questions for you in chat from WJB. My man, WJB, pop those questions off, man. In the meantime, actually, I'll ask you my own question. So I guess let's actually talk Big Beautiful Bill, because that's our big beautiful question here. What is your I guess general thoughts on the bill in totality?
Well, the bill has it's an incredibly mixed bag for me personally. A lot of it is, and I've gone through it, a lot of it's very mundane stuff. It's how much funding is X program going to get, and oftentimes it's not very significant. But I think its support for farmers is good. Its tax cuts for the rich are undesirable completely, but the military funding towards Indo-Pacific installations is very important to me. And the no tax on tips, or at least I think it's more accurately called a tax benefit, is a very good provision. Overall, a very mixed bag, though. I think it's really hard to say that this is a super, super good bill. The essential subsidization of manufacturing that's being pushed through by this bill is good. I think a lot of the more fundamental objections have to do with the specific sections dealing with tax cuts. That's way more important, I think, to bring objections to. The cuts to funding for Planned Parenthood and such are very performative, and they were blocked by the courts anyways. So in practice, I really don't have that objection. I would if it was actually pushed through and if it had any value, but I don't think that'll affect Planned Parenthood at all. So those are my overall thoughts on the bill. It's an interesting development for the Republicans, especially because of their anti-war platform that they were pushing for a while. And given the billions in Indo-Pacific funding that's being expanded, they're expanding Indo-Pacific funding into outposts across the Philippines to Hawaii. They're not just expanding military infrastructure. It's not just new roads. It's not just new buildings or building upgrades or runway upgrades. A lot of it is Air Force fighter jet funding and funding for other vehicles and other military infrastructure that is offensive related. For example, we have millions being poured into cyber attack funding, offensive cyber attack funding. If you read the bill, it actually makes this very clear that the offensive cyber attack funding, it has, I can find the
I pulled it up on Streamer, just like the general cliff notes.
All right. It's explicitly earmarked, 1 billion explicitly earmarked for offensive cyber operations. So, yeah, that's really interesting. No more foreign wars. Very, very funny joke, but not happening.
Do you think Trump supporters will ever catch on to that and feel a little betrayed, I guess? Not that it's bad that we do it, but that I guess he's lying about it.
Some have. Some have already caught on. I don't think anybody who hasn't already caught on is going to after this. So the elderly who still talk about, and you've seen this in interviews the last 4 years when people go, oh, if he shot somebody in the street, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't change if how I voted. So I don't think these people are going to be very upset about this. I think that it's a lot of the 7% maybe that are ideologically motivated in their support for Trump that are gonna drop off after this, but they're still gonna vote red in the next elections because that's all they've got. So they'll still go. Maybe if Rubio runs, they'll go, oh, I really disagree with Rubio on a lot, but he's sure better than whatever, AOC, right? So in practice, I don't think the dissatisfaction is going to affect much yet, not in the short term. And people like Fuentes are calling for disengaging. Oh, yeah?
Oh, you're good. No, I was going to, but there's actually another question in chat from Theodore Vey. So he said, did you read all 900 pages of the Big Beautiful Bill? There's actually, I guess to be specific, 887. But did you read those pages or just a digest or summary of it? And should Theodore read it himself?
I read most of the first, I want to say, I'm reading from the congress.gov. So they have in the 119th Congress section, House Bill 1, they have, it's just a giant mega page, and there's no page numbers, so I don't know how many pages I've read of it. But I want to say the first quarter. After that, it becomes a lot of financial stuff, like, oh, here we're going to devote like 1 million into this government program, and it doesn't have a lot of more operational stuff. A lot of the actual operational stuff of like what new stuff they're implementing, that's going to be in like the first half, maybe 2/3, but most of the important stuff is chunked into the beginning. So that's my answer.
Fair enough. I did want to ask you about, I guess, Well, something that's a little personal to me in this bill that I am not happy about, I'm just going to come out and say it, even though, like, you know, it's factually accurate, but also, like, personally, it makes me a little upset, is in terms of the disability funding and how it doesn't technically get rid of it, but the way that it's written makes it not mandatory spending, so that you're looking at potentially millions, at least bare minimum, hundreds of thousands of people who would otherwise rely on federal disability insurance. And I personally have chronic illnesses, so like I'm a little worried about that. I've never filed yet because I've worked too much, but I could have a bout of illness. And I guess, like, do you think there's enough of a backlash, whether media-wise or people, I guess, experiencing that, whether or not they're just old and on Medicare or they actually have disabilities, lifelong illnesses, and they'll feel the backlash enough that it actually makes them go out and vote?
Be a potential backlash from it. But what I'd be skeptical about in regards to that is the fact that there are disability, I don't know if they're aid services really that are expanded, but more so things associated with disability assistance. For example, now any household that includes an elderly or disabled member who receives public energy assistance payments, they can now opt into like a standard utility allowance. So that's a big financial help for households that have disabled members in them. And even though the funding is getting cut in other areas and it's made voluntary, I think that the institution of things like that kind of obfuscate how much the backlash is going to be to that in the long term. So I'm I don't know that I'd say I think there's going to be a backlash. It's a possibility. It's just that I can't really say that with too much certainty because of the fact that there are these other provisions that have been put into the bill, which in other areas expand disability services. So interesting. We'll see how it unfolds.
Fair enough. Honestly, for me, like as a journalist, like one thing nobody talks about, especially not the mainstream media, is that the issue, this is like not the main issue. It's not like before this, everything was hunky-dory for insurance. I think people don't realize how much of a pain in the ass it is to actually file for these insurance. Like you have to meet all these requirements, and if someone at the DMV doesn't like you, guess what? You're screwed. Or I guess in Michigan, we have the Secretary of State, and they're the ones responsible for it. And I guess like I see a lot of that in this bill, where a lot of these consequences are for things that have already either been crippled, underfunded, or just outright, I guess, inefficient. And do you think that's going to be one of the biggest, I guess, insulators to any potential backlash to this bill, is the fact that these programs that are being either defunded or reallocated are already not being run well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know if I could have said it better. There's no better way to push through what Republicans have wanted than to make sure that what they're targeting are programs that have already been very it's not a word, but maladministered, like incorrectly administrated. Putting those programs back on the right course, just completely slashing them entirely. That's definitely going to insulate a lot of the backlash. Absolutely.
Do you think the mainstream media, I guess, has enough credibility to even push a narrative in this direction? Because that is another thing that I think is the other side of the coin, whether it's material consequences, is this. Like, I don't know if the mainstream media has enough credibility at this point to even make that case to the public.
They have the ability to make the case to their audience. People like is it Robert Reich or Richard Reich? I forget.
Robert.
They definitely have enough. They have enough credibility among their audiences to be able to push forward narrative about this. But the actual target audience they're getting is so much smaller than it used to be. They aren't really going to be able to push through a popular narrative to say this bill is bad. Sean Hannity and folks like that are very happy about this on the right. And I don't see it becoming something that's actually hated in the public eye, especially not since, as you said, the media doesn't have a different version of that. The media doesn't have the reach it used to have to be able to formulate a strong narrative about this. Especially since they've become so disconnected from the average American.
I think it's going to be an interesting case because I think on one hand you could see traditional media actually having a role, but on the other hand, like I think honestly, if you're going to see backlash, you're going to see it internally from different segments of the right or like those independents, new media types, where any backlash from this bill is going to be coming from people, even if the concerns are not exactly, valid, but they're coming from a source that either has no built-in trust or distrust, but it could either be that or a source that is actively attacked mainstream media. And I think in this case, what I see is if it goes bad, that's why it will go bad. It will have very little to do for mainstream media because I think they've already maxed out in their appeal at this point, especially when you're talking about like newer left-wing media outlets. And I guess in this regard, if it does go bad, where there actually are consequences, what would be the biggest thing in this bill, or maybe even top 3 things that could have material electoral consequences for the Republican Party?
The disability cuts and the tax cuts for the rich, as well as the excessive military spending.
Interesting. I think so. It's hard to say because this bill is massive. So it literally could be anything, even like just a random clause that doesn't actually do very much but becomes polarized in the media. I think, honestly, you want to know what I think the biggest one's going to be?
What do you think?
I think this right here. I have it on my stream. They can see it. The rural hospitals. If you see rural hospitals actually having to file for bankruptcy and losing jobs just because they're not being funded enough, I think that would be huge. Although I think there could be opportunities, especially in states like Texas and Florida that have a strong tax base, relatively speaking, where the state steps in and fills in where federal funding may be lacking. But like for states like Arkansas, Oklahoma, states that are red states that don't have these population senators that can literally keep the state afloat, I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle in terms of mitigating the backlash for hospital jobs. What do you think about that?
Because I can't. One sec. I'll look at your stream right now.
Oh, it's good. I'll just read it to you. The bill also includes a rural hospital stabilization fund after some GOP senators expressed concern over how rural hospitals can be impacted. So they have $50 billion for these rural hospitals, but the problem is, that's $50 billion for the whole country, for all the hospitals, and the cuts are already, let me see what the actual number is there. Yeah, lowering provider taxes 6% to 3.5%, and that's of the entire country's taxes. So you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. And the only thing that they have in there to keep it afloat is $50 billion from this bill. And obviously, I think we both know that like percentage of taxes in terms of helping people is a more sustainable way than just drawing up some arbitrary number. And I think that could be very much a wedge issue, especially for 2026, where I think people are going to blame their state governments more than the federal government. And you always see like more in tune voters during midterms.
True. Good point on the rural hospital.
It'll be interesting.
That's part of the bill I didn't go over in that bottom third.
Yeah. So like they allocate this $50 billion, and $50 billion looks big, but like if you do the math, provider taxes being lowered nationwide, when you have provider taxes at 6% going down to 3.5%, like that is literally hundreds of billions of dollars. And I don't know if it's hundreds of billions, but it's at least 100 billion for sure. I would have to do the math in my head, and it's not going to be enough unless the state governments step in. And if they do, I think they could mitigate those effects, but it depends state for state.
True. Good point.
It's a mess of a bill. This shouldn't have been one bill. I don't know why Congress keeps doing this other than the fact that they want to make a show of it. It's not a good way to run a country.
Yeah.
It's definitely not beautiful. This is not a beautiful bill. This is a person with illnesses. It's not beautiful.
The funny thing is that the provision that prohibits clinics from providing abortions, or which provide abortions to be able to access Medicaid funds, that section of the bill is really funny because abortions they're already not covered by Medicaid or any federal funds. So it's just attacking all the other family planning and women's health services. It's just kind of weird.
Yeah, I think honestly though, because it's sort of like a red meat item, right? Where that the idea is, oh, we're defunding Planned Parenthood. That's what the right wing base wants, and I don't think that the base cares enough about how it actually does, and just wants to see it in there. You know, I think that it's not going to have backlash, in my opinion, or at least like nobody's going to be paying attention to that very much, especially considering these other items. Honestly, I would consider that a mistake for mainstream media if they really wanted to reach like an older conservative audience. Like your Fox News grandparents.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, whoops. Let me fix that. Yeah, no, it's an interesting bill. I guess I want to talk more about the foreign policy aspects of it because you've been following that, correct?
Very closely, yeah.
So I guess, do you think it's a net positive? It's strictly in the foreign policy in regards to this bill?
Because I'm an interventionist, I'm going to have to say yes. The allocations that have been made will be very, very important for defending regional posts there. I think a lot of this is going to gear up towards war with Iran. The bases we're funding, especially Air Force. Iran is a very volatile, a geographically volatile country. So it makes sense that we're funding Air Force in the Indo-Pacific instead of the Navy, which is not receiving as much funding as the Air Force is by a long shot. We are giving 532 million USD for Pacific Air Force war drills in this bill. Did you know that? 532 million. We're to exercise our troops and do operations funds for the Army, Marine Corps, Air Force, the SOF, etc. That's going to be like 555 million USD. We have 19 million for small naval craft. We have 124 million for mission networks, 100 million for cluster kits. So when you hear people say, "Well, this is raising the debt ceiling," this is why it's not very. It's not very financially sustainable, but I don't think it's supposed to be a long-term trajectory. I think this is gearing up for a foreign conflict. 500 million for like an economic competition cell, and about 1 billion for cyber attacks. Be more. I think they have 143 million for undersea sonar arrays to track submarines that they're constructing, 30 million for recon and surveillance in the Indo-Pacific specifically and Africa, 155 million for surveillance satellites. You have, 528 million for like Silent Barker to monitor, quote, everything in orbit, as they say right here. I think they say it right here. I'll have to find it later. About 3.65 billion USD for satellite defense specifically. So our missile system is protecting our satellites in space. 1 billion for our space lane program, I think.